while the girls improved 2-6. The team will host Shrewsbury at 7 p.m. on Friday night. The indoor track teams are doing well and compete against league rival Westboro today. The Alpine and Nordic ski teams completed in their first race of the season last week. Both the boys and the girls ice hockey teams are hovering around a 500 record. The boys lost a tough matchup with the North Middlesex on Monday 3-2, while the girls defeated Oakmont 2-1. The wrestling teams placed second in the Northbridge tournament and third at Marlborough tournament over the weekend. The girls' basketball team defeated Shrewsbury last night to improve to 4-5 overall. The girls' team hosts Westboro on Friday night. The boys' basketball team faced their first loss of the season last week. However, they defeated the previously unbeaten Groton Dunstable team on Friday night and Shrewsbury last night to improve to 9-1 overall. The boys' team is one of the top-ranked teams in Central Massachusetts right now. Midterms are next week, and the school will begin at 9:40 on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, with a half day on Friday and the day ending at 11:30. The DECA competition was last week at UMass Lowell. There were 143 students participating and 92 continuing on to states in March. Mr. Poirier's baseball and history class had a special guest speaker this week, Kevin McCoy, a pitcher who was recruited by the Boston Red Sox in 2014. Kevin spent time discussing his road to the draft, college experience at Bryant University, and mentioned a number of times the irony of growing up a Yankees fan and now playing for the Boston Red Sox. The one-day app created by Nashoba's very own Nashoba programming team has hit 400 downloads. The app tells you what classes you have every day and alerts you on your phone. The app is available for free on iTunes. Nashoba welcomed William Kamkwamba, author of The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, yesterday. His book is a true story about how he got through a famine in rural Malawi by building a windmill. Copies of his book were sold as a fundraiser to help alleviate the current famine and protect future famines in Malawi. The scholarship season is here for seniors and applications are open. Guidance has sent an email to the students and families via Naviance. Please send the scholarship information sheet and booklet with listings of the scholarships offered, which is posted on the high school's website. Click on the guidance and the scholarship link. Most applications are due by March 1st. Students with questions may speak to Susan O'Lear or Stephanie Hilliger in the guidance office.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Nick?
I do have one question. So the app that's available, was that developed at the high school?
I believe it was developed by high school students, but not like as part of a class.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. We're going to move into our new business section. Pat Maroney is here. Do you want to do the Brooke, do you want to do the donation from the class of 1966 real quick?
It doesn't make any difference. She's going to do them both.
It's up to you. Okay, so next up is the budget update in the FY16 year-end report, which is coming to us a little bit late.
Wake up the computer.
Pat, why don't you do the, while we're waiting for that, why don't you do the other piece so we can kind of move it along? That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, right on the top. Actually, no, right there. The second with the clip on it. Yeah.
Oh.
So on December 8th, Perry Graham, principal of the high school, sent a letter acknowledging the donation from the Nashoba Regional School, Regional High School class of 1966. And as part of their reunion activities, they raised money to donate to the school. They met with the representatives and generously, they generously presented a check for $1,000 to the school to beautify its outdoor spaces.
That's very nice. Class of 1966. So you are looking for,
We're looking for the school committee to accept this donation in behalf of the high school and for the purpose of purchasing perhaps a bench for the upper courtyard and a plaque recognizing the class.
thank you very much, class of 66. I think that this letter is in the packet. Mark, would you make a motion?
I move that the school committee accept the gift of the class of 1966 for beautifying outdoor spaces of the high school.
Second. And a second is Kathy. Any questions? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you, class of 66. That's a lovely gift. Okay, Pat, are you ready?
So I'm going to move on to the results of operations. Okay. For fiscal year ended 6/30/2016. So I will get right to the expenditures, which is very small. For those of you that have it you have it on your computers there, I'll walk right through it and hit the highlights. In insurance, there's a significant surplus in that line. It's $168,000 of that is attributed to health insurance savings due to the increased participation by the district retirees in a MedX 3 plan. And also, when we budgeted for this, the rate increases were less than anticipated.
Now, Pat, you have these on each slide, right, as you're going
Yes,
through
I
here,
do.
so perhaps you could put that up,
Oh,
please.
sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, next. Administration. In administration, we have a surplus, and in that surplus, it is attributed to a $20,000 transportation savings. When we budgeted for that, we budgeted a little bit more, thinking that we would have additional costs for that year and did not, so we had $20,000 for that. There was a $65,000 school choice assessment reduction and also a $70,000 charter school reduction in that assessment.
So does that mean that fewer kids are choicing and going to charter school?
Yes, that's exactly what that means.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, next. In facilities, we recognize a surplus in the electricity line of $112,000. In prior years, we have upgraded some of the different things around the district, changing bulbs and whatever, and we're starting to recognize some savings in that account. And also $68,000 in heating fuel savings. It was mild winter, so that's where that is. In teaching and learning, there was some salary savings and a reduction in membership and dues. Special education, we had a $15,000 savings in transportation costs for that year. That is something that we never know really if it's going to be a little more or a little less, but we did well for transportation. And also, just to disclose that we paid out-of-district tuition, we prepaid out-of-district tuition out of the tuition line for $300,000 for fiscal year 17. Mass General allows us to do that to help us with our districts in the future. Next, technology. We had some PD funds that were not expended in that year. And we had some technology consultants, we cut back to cover some telephone costs that were not budgeted. Apparently the telephone was not budgeted for that for fiscal year 16, and we had to cover some of the costs, so we cut back on some of the consultants that we use for
So what was the savings there?
the total savings.
Because I see that on the other pages you've got the actual cost. But on the PD funds and the technology consultants, do you
Well,
know
there
what
was
the?
a total of 41,000 for that site, the technology site.
Okay.
And I would say the PD funds were $6,000 and the consultants were the difference between that.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
thank you. And at the high school, there's $150,000 that was left in that site, and that is all due to new hire salary savings. And if you look at the other schools, there are smaller amounts, 5,000, 17,000, 31,000, and those are all attributed to the same new hire salary savings. And
Does anybody have any questions before Pat goes into the revenue? Okay.
okay, so here's the revenue. So we had some revenue surpluses this year. In regional transportation, there was an increase in our reimbursement. It's up to 73.1% of our claim. Our claim is what we, when we submit the end of the year report the previous year, they give us a certain percentage of those expenditures that are allowable, which is students that are transported 1.5 miles or more. So in that case, the state decided to give us a little bit more money than they did last year. Last year, I believe it was 72%. Now it's up to 73%. I don't know what we're going to get this year, but hopefully we'll get at least the same.
Can you put that slide up, please, Pat?
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
Sorry. Okay, Medicaid reimbursement is up due to a reevaluation of prior years. We changed consultants that we used for Medicaid, and in doing so, I don't know if that initiated it, but they've gone back through previous years and we've received more funds based on what they found in those evaluations. Also, in our other miscellaneous revenue, we have a MEMA reimbursement and homeless transportation that also elevated that particular line to the point where it is.
Thank you so much for tuning into this American.
Sorry,
Thanks for sharing.
I was trying to shut it off.
It's all right. We're gonna keep moving on. Go ahead. Can I stop you for a second? The MEMA reimbursement, was that the chiller? Do you know what that, what?
That was that storm that we had, I believe it was it February?
Yeah.
And there were all kinds of costs for snow removal, removing the snow off of the roofs. They were afraid that the roofs were going to collapse and everything. There was a lot of costs involved in that. And we received a significant reimbursement for that.
Can I ask when that came through? Like guesstimate
I want to say it was like February or March, which would have been like a year.
of last year.
Yes, of last year. And homeless transportation, which is something that we started to receive this year. We don't have a budget line for that, so it's in miscellaneous revenue.
Are we gonna add a budget line for that? Is it something that's a
Yes, it
recurring
is.
thing?
Yes.
So we will add a budget, that's
Yes,
great.
and expenditure line as well.
Okay.
So, and just a note in regards to the regional transportation, a year ago, last July, or June rather, you voted to establish a regional transportation reimbursement fund so that if our transportation costs are to exceed what we have budgeted, we could go to the excess revenue in the regional transportation. And this year we had approximately $216,000, and I believe that if we use it this year, it's fine, otherwise it reverts back to E&D
Okay.
by law.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Is that it?
That's it.
Nobody has any questions?
Oh,
Kathy? Yeah.
Okay. So, there was a revenue surplus of $577,000, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the budget versus the actual is in the black, $1 million.
Yes.
So what's the total surplus that we have? I don't know, is there a relationship between these two amounts, or is there a total surplus?
There is there's a surplus of the total of those, the 577,000 plus the 1,000,002.
So it's like 1.6 million surplus. And then what's E&D?
E&D, we don't have that figure yet. We're waiting for the state to release that number, and
Okay.
it should be very close to that.
So what happens when we have a budget surplus of $1.6 million?
Well, now that you're asking me.
It
That's
goes-
Brooke.
Well, I think that's where we need to sit down. We actually start to have limited discussion on that this morning at the finance subcommittee, and I brought that up before around this table, saying that's one of the things we need to talk about. What do we think E&D should be? What's a fair amount? I know I'm meeting with one of the founders of MARS, which is Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools, on Friday, to have this kind of discussion with them and say, what do you do in terms of what across the Commonwealth? What is the norm for this? And then I'll report that back.
So I just want to make sure I understand, and I'm not even feigning ignorance, it's truly ignorance. We have $1.5 million surplus from last year. Does this take into, that's a lot of money, does this take into account what we had to spend that was unexpected expenditures that you found?
I'll turn
In the new
that
fiscal
back.
year? No.
So I want to be careful with
It's not
this,
a net.
okay, because it's a big number, and I'm assuming we didn't spend 1.5 million in unexpected expenditures. But at the same time, I want to know what we're going to do with E&D. That was something that the finance subcommittee's been tasked with, kind of coming forward with a recommendation to the school committee, but we need to be thinking about whatever's left over. I don't want to park it in a savings account again.
No, but I think you also want to keep in mind that anytime you go into a new budget year, especially for a district our size, just natural contractual obligations that you have are always going to be in that about $1 to $1.5 million mark, just to let you know that. And this year with us, a negotiation of both contracts, I'm not sure where that's going to land. So I just want to make sure that that's out there as well.
So, but the message we're sending to the communities is that we're in a very good place right now, which we need to take into consideration as we move into this budget cycle.
Yeah, yes.
Respectfully understanding that there's a surplus there, yeah.
But this money, this doesn't roll into this is FY 16.
Right, it goes into E&D, what they call E&D.
And we
that-
don't know how
that's like
much
our
we have
savings.
there currently.
We don't have an official report of what our E&D is yet from the state. It should be any day now.
Okay, so what I heard you say, Brooke, is that you're going to get a recommendation about how much money should be in there.
For a regional school district of our size.
Okay. So, if what we have in there exceeds what the recommendation is, what happens to that money?
Well, I think then we come back to the school committee at large and have that discussion.
I think the school committee needs to make a decision on where they want the E&D to be.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
I mean, I think that's,
Well, I mean, I'm talking about, so if, I don't know, should it be 5%, should E&D be at most 5% of your operating budget? So what if, between this money and what's currently in there, it's over that?
Right, and that's a
That's what I'm
discussion that
talking
needs to
about.
come back around this table. You're absolutely right.
so you're still doing work to find, well, you haven't gotten an assessment back from the state.
That's
so
right,
we're
we're
gonna
still
get
waiting for
that.
the Department of Revenue to come back and affirm the numbers.
Okay, Lynn?
I might be mixing years up, but we're adding a lot of positions, and that's out of this budget, so not out of the one we're talking, not out of this 1.6. This is not anything to do with that, that's last year.
No.
That's last year.
That's last year. Okay.
So, but can I ask a question on this? Because just for clarification, so like for instance, these HP loans that are mentioned in the forensic audit, that is stuff that, while it may not have technically all been out there, black and white, it was part of the budget that's now been pulled back. And I'm just trying to logically follow this, are we now going to have some holes that need to be filled? So we're taking that money that you're talking about there,
Yes.
that's not net. That's money that's been identified, that is surplus, but there also needs to be a list coming from you as far as the needs that, we have deficits, et cetera. So then we need a net. So I think that's important that the towns understand that that's not free, clean money that's there.
That's exactly right.
Until we get the other part, which has been part of your challenge. Not only are you creating a budget that's almost like a zero-based budget you guys are doing, but you have to deconstruct things, prove them out, and then construct the budget. And
That's
that's been
exactly
a great
right.
challenge that you've had. So I just want to make that kind of clear, because it shouldn't get out there that there's
Right.
1.5
Yeah.
period that's out there in surplus
I
till
absolutely
we
agree
know
with
the
you.
end number.
And the HP, that's such a perfect example, and where do we go with that? And again, that's probably something that's gonna have to come around this table as well, in terms of the HP, because that has been an ongoing, every year you've had that money, and for all intents and purposes, we just shut it off, right, in July of this year. So that means that you're gonna have that hole in your next budget year, so you're out, that was a perfect example.
And the intent, as I understand right now, is to create E&D as a source, which it's truly E&D and not a piggy bank or a wallet that gets dipped into every year to supplement the budget.
Right.
So some of these numbers that are coming out are preliminary from what the end result might actually be.
You're absolutely right, and there's $1 million again that's basically flowing through every year,
Right.
or thereabouts of every year that we also want to stop. And to your point, E&D from my lens right now, and again, we'll have further discussion on Friday, but from my lens should be something that's parked over here, that's like like a stabilization fund, that you only go into if for those one-time shot needs, as opposed to the process that's been taken previously. So it's my intent right now to establish it separately as a parking place for specific monies that we need to go, if we
And that's
need to
what
go
it's
into.
intended to be.
Absolutely,
Sure.
yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Questions for Pat? Nobody? All right, thank you, Pat. Okay, the budget workshop, so it looks like we do have a quorum on January 28th from 8 to 12 at this point. I gotta talk with Brooke because it may expand or collapse a little bit, don't expect it to collapse much. But as long as we have a quorum. You didn't see the memo?
No, 8 to 12 is fine. If you're talking about it, are you saying that?
So
we
let me
need
explain
8
what
to
this, yeah, let me
Yeah,
explain
yeah.
what this is. The budget workshop is our opportunity to hear from the administration what their first pass at the budget is, full first pass. We're gonna hear from every cost center owner. It will be open to the public, but it is the school committee's first view of the budget. We talked about, do we chunk it out, but I don't think that gives us a full picture. So we're looking at scheduling right now because there's a lot of people that I feel kind of strongly that we should do it all in one fell swoop and then have people come back as we start to move through questions and rejiggering. I think it just gives us a more appropriate picture, and I think
More
this year
comprehensive.
we really need that. So, if it runs over and you can't make it and we still have a quorum and you have to leave, that's,
And that's all I want to know about, is
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
Parameters are fine right now.
I think from my perspective too, I just wanna make sure that no school committee member feels rushed, or that we only have this 10-minute window or 15-minute window, or whatever it is that we decide upon. I want to make sure that everybody feels really comfortable in going back and asking more questions. And so right now, all of your principals, all of your people that oversee your cost centers are all planning on being there. And I think for the one or two that can't, they have a designee that's coming. So I think we're pretty clear on who will be there that day.
yeah.
You're gonna have a budget book like we had last year?
Yes, we're creating a budget because we're going long. Yeah.
In detail? Great, thank you.
So then, once we have this budget workshop and we do a couple more weeks worth of work, then we are gonna have a budget hearing for the public to come and folks from the towns to come and ask questions, and certainly, all of these meetings are open anyway, you can certainly come. The, Brooke and Alita have arranged to have the budget workshop recorded anyway, so that'll be on cable if you don't feel like you wanna come and sit with us. We'll have breakfast for you, but if you don't, that's okay, you can watch it on television. So I need someone to, make a motion to accept this, it's a new meeting.
I move that we accept the meeting on January 28th from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. As a budget workshop for initial discussion.
On the budget, okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Nicole.
Where are we meeting?
Questions, we'll be meeting in this room. Yep. Any other questions on it? All set? All those in favor? It's unanimous, thank you all. Okay, we've got one more quick one, and actually, I think we're doing well with time. Class size policy. Oh, the class size policy. Who wants to cover that one, Nicole or Neil? Or do you want to table it?
No, I don't think we need to table it. Do you think we need to table it?
Go ahead.
No changes were made since the last time we discussed this.
So play it through for me. How is this going to work? So we're going from more structure in the policy to no structure in the policy. So I said this before, and I just want to make sure it's recognized again that this is one of the policies that parents are really interested in, and they quote it back to us. So help me play through how will class sizes be determined and when, and what's the approval chain?
Superintendent Clenchey, how will class sizes be?
Well, I think that one of the concerns I had is, when we had this earlier discussion, is you want to really be cautious as school committee members that you don't put something into a policy that ties the hands of administration or what have you. I mean, at the end of the day, we're always monitoring class sizes. I mean, you know, for example, even right now, we're still really closely monitoring Bolton and Center, for example, like grade 3-4 level. We're always monitoring those sizes. We also want to make sure that we have parity across the district. So if we're doing something, for example, if we were to set something and say it was 24 or 25 at the grade 3 level at Center School, then we would be doing the same thing in Lancaster. So I think one of the reasons why the school committee members and that sit on that policy committee came forward with this is just to basically say we know that it's being monitored, we know that it's being watched, and we know that appropriate actions will be taken if these class sizes get to be too large or to an uncomfortable size. So we're always monitoring that.
And it is the school committee's responsibility to monitor the superintendent being true to her word.
And how do we do that?
With a report out.
Right.
That was the one bullet that I wondered, because did you take that bullet out?
You know, the
was
superintendent
there.
will report to the school committee.
Guidelines will be, guidelines, okay, got it.
Well, some of the challenges that you look at that exist right now, so you talk about like parity across the board. So in Lancaster, for instance, if there are classes that have more children that have special needs and so forth, the teachers and the aides can only handle so many kids. And so based on the needs of that student or the students, and so you build that out, then you complement the number of children that can fit in that class.
Mm-hmm.
That is typically not going to be the same class size as, let's say, a class with children that don't have the special needs. They can be larger, and yet they're not conforming, but you have that ability to make those decisions.
That's exactly right. And I think if we put a number there and it goes up, like for example, we might have a move in and that number suddenly, I'm just saying if you put that number to 24, for example, and it goes to 25, then the expectation from the unions for everybody is that you're going to immediately move another teacher. And we always have to think ahead. If this is happening in grade 3, then that next year you got to think about that grade 4. You always have to think broader than just sheer numbers. And I think that was kind of the conversation that we had around the table on this.
Okay.
Is just looking beyond just a sheer number.
And it looks like this was last adopted in 1995. with a small revision in 2008, so I'm good with this.
The intent's not to grow the class sizes bigger and to
No.
justify growing the class, just to be clear, not to justify growing the classes bigger.
Right.
Oh, well, that's good
absolutely right.
because I wouldn't be able to vote for it.
No, but I think that needs to be said, right? So that the parents understand that it's not the intent to grow the class size
I'm
bigger.
assuming that this translates somewhere like the high school, like this. So you may have, an English course, right? So maybe that course can handle more kids than a robotics class. And it allows you the accordion.
That's a great example.
To be able to. But I hope that means that the scheduling at the high school is gonna be a little bit more, examined a little bit more, right? Because we've got exploded math classes that we've heard about for a long time
And then just the opposite, classes that are really too small.
and too small that we have to figure out, are we gonna be making some shifts and changes? And when does that discussion come up?
That discussion is, to be honest, is always ongoing for us between Dr. Gray and myself right now. So you're not asking here, I'm just saying.
Right.
We have that ongoing discussion.
So would he be sharing that with us at the report out
I was
on
gonna
the
say
28th?
I was gonna say the 28th would be a perfect time to have that
So
discussion.
can we make sure he does that, because I
Yeah.
think that was one of the things we talked about pretty heavily last year too.
Yeah.
Right.
Piggyback
Yes.
on that,
Yeah.
I'd like to know, teacher load as well as a breakdown of the classes and how many kids are in each class. There was an issue last year that I raised
Yeah.
about, a .8 teacher who had a class load of about 40 kids, which is
Okay.
problematic.
Mhm.
All right, so why don't we, that sounds good. If there's no more questions, comments on class size policy, Kath?
What does manageable mean? How do you determine?
I think that
this?
basically means you're leaving it up to the superintendent's
Yeah.
discretion.
And I think Neil's example was a really good example.
Okay.
And we are getting reported out annually, so we understand the class sizes. Things in theory shouldn't be growing. Like if you're questioning manageability, then it's up to the superintendent to give a rationale for why a certain class size, and it needs to be something that we all
And
say
this
is great.
Also an issue that is so important to the parents. I don't see if there is an issue in the school of us not hearing about it, or the superintendent first not hearing about it in the middle of the year in between report outs. And, this policy allows the flexibility to address it in the middle of the year.
Okay. I'm good with it.
Yeah.
Nick?
I just wanted to say, so like one of my classes, so like my math class has 29 people in it, and I have a class that's with 7 people in it. So like, at least from my perspective, I've noticed a lot of flexibility.
Well, I think that's what we want.
And that's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, any other comments, or do you want to make a motion to accept the class size policy as amended?
I will move that we accept policy IIB
As amended?
as amended.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
Mark, any further conversation? Not all those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you, policy. Appreciate that. Okay, so we have now come to the portion in the agenda that I think most of our guests are here for. I'm going to invite John Sullivan from Melanson Heath and Company, who conducted the forensic audit for us, and Nan O'Neill from Murphy Hesse Toomey Lahane, our attorney, to come on up to the table. We're going to run this a little bit different, so if you have any questions, first I'd like to take, John's put together a presentation for us. I took all of the requests that folks sent, and I forwarded them to John and to Nan so that they were prepared to answer those questions. John's put together a presentation, a few slides that will answer some of those questions, but I still want you to have your chance to ask and engage with them. So it will be more of an open session. I would just ask that you direct your questions to me so we can manage this portion of the meeting. And not because I'm a control freak. And then when we get to Alita, I think they need your help. Thanks.
Yeah.
Transfers in control account. Invoices, right? That's what you're saying? No.
Okay. Are all these lights on one switch?
Right.
All right, John, I'll let
There's no
you
answer to it. Yeah.
do your thing. John has the floor. This document is on the website for anybody who wants to take a look at it.
So, thank you for inviting me back again. So, since the last time I was here, there have been several questions forwarded to me by the school committee members, as well as several by the public. In reading through those questions, there were sort of some common themes in areas that were asking for more detail and more information. So I thought maybe the most efficient way to do that would be to put together this presentation, and hopefully that'll answer some of the questions. I think that maybe the best way is to go through the presentation, and then if there are remaining questions that you want to ask after the presentation, then I'll be certainly happy to answer them. So one of the topics that was frequently asked is in the forensic report, we talked about purchases were made at the end of the year. And the issue is surplus money at the end of the year, was that being used by buying things at the end of the year to reduce or limit the amount of surplus? So the forensic report noted capital purchases at year end and related budget transfers to the computer hardware and district textbook adoption account. So I'm detailing those. It was also asked, well, what about other accounts? And what I can say is that I did not go through every single account. By far the majority of district costs are salaries, which would not be subject to this type of thing. And so although we did look at other places that we would commonly see this type of thing, these are the only two that we found any substantial activity related to that. So there may be more in other accounts, but they were not identified in our forensic audit.
So I'm going to stop you for a second. Can everyone hear John? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, John. Thanks.
Thank you. So what I'm doing is walking through each year. So in 2014, the original computer hardware budget was $314,250. At the end of the year, there were transfers of $146,621, so that the final budget was $460,000. Of that money, $438,000 was expended. The remaining $21,000 was encumbered, so that the ending balance in that account was zero. So all that money was used. So the first thing you're going to do is look at the $146,000 worth of transfers and say when and how were those made. So on June 18th, there was a transfer voted at a school committee meeting on June 17th in the amount of $90,500. In looking at the minutes that were attached to that transfer request, I quote, that transfers requested tonight are mostly due to movements of salary and insurance line. And nowhere in there did I see discussion or anything in the minutes regarding the transfer related to the computer hardware account. In addition, on June 30th, there was a transfer within control accounts of $56,121. You'll recall when I made the initial presentation, I said that there are transfers made with school committee approval, and there are also transfers within control accounts that are made by administration without taking those transfers to the school committee. So both types of transfers were made here for a total of $146,621, and as you see by the dates, that happened at the end of the year, right at June 30. So what was purchased with that? At the end of the year, meaning late June of 2014, computers, a presentation system, Apple computers. So actual purchases in late June of $112,240. And then there were actual encumbrances of $21,965. Those were on purchase orders that were dated June 30. So basically, the whole amount of the transfers in substance were spent right at the end of the year on June 30. In looking at 2015, the original budget was $314,000, and their transfers were very small. The final budget of $321,943, expended of $255,145, and then encumbered of $66,798. So looking at what was purchased at year end, there was one small computer purchase near year end, and the encumbrances were primarily one large purchase on a purchase order dated June 24th for $62,519 to Apple Computer. So the encumbrances were purchased at the end of the year, but the expenditures that were in the budget were purchased throughout the year. And then in 2016, the budget was $270,000. That was not adjusted. There were no transfers. And the actual is $270,000, a nice round number. How does that work? It's because this budget and the actual expenditures were the 3 Hewlett-Packard lease payments only. So nothing else was purchased out of the computer hardware account in fiscal 2016. The textbook adoption account, in 2014, the original budget was $50,950. Transfers of $43,000. Final budget $94,000, expended $71,000, encumbered $22,000, and again a balance of 0. So the whole budget was either expended or encumbered. So when was it expended or, first of all, the transfer, that was a transfer within control accounts. So that transfer did not come to the school committee.
Should it have?
Well, we're going to talk about the issue of whether or not the school committee policy is going to continue to authorize administration to make transfers within school, within certain control accounts. So that's a policy decision that we'll be looking for the school committee to make. So items purchased at year end, there were 2 McGraw-Hill purchases in April. The rest of them, Cambridge Press, McGraw-Hill, and then the amount encumbered, these were all made at year end. So basically, most of, certainly all of the budget adjustment was expended right at year end.
Pat, do you know if these June 30th, the last day of the fiscal year for these looks like 30, what is it? Help me out, somebody. $31,000. Were those textbooks used in the following year?
I would assume so.
Okay.
The 2015 budget was increased substantially, so the budget itself was $160,000. So again, if we go back to 2014, the original budget was $50,000. So it went from $50,000 in 2014 to $160,000 in 2015, and actually there was a transfer out of that budget, so that the final budget was only $135,000. 86,000 was expended and 47,000 was encumbered, leaving a small balance in that account. So on June 18th of 15, the school committee voted the transfer of $25,000 as a reduction of textbooks. And the minutes indicate the funding source for the operational transfers is surpluses in several operating lines. A number of them were mentioned, and the textbook line was specifically highlighted. So what was purchased at the end of the year? So there was a person early learning program for $11,000 on June 19th. Wilson language training, $25,000. And of the $47,000 encumbrances, $20,000 to McGraw-Hill and another $22,000 to person early learning. Those are both dated in June of 2015. Thank you. 2016 textbook adoption, the original budget was $69,000. 42,657 of transfers for a final budget of $111,657, and none of that was expended in 2016, but all of it was encumbered at the end of 2016.
We had a elementary math curriculum adoption.
Oh, the pilot.
Well, no, the pilot was 2015.
Oh, that's right.
This was the year that they were
Like everyday
rolling
math
it
or
out.
whatever.
What did they use to pay for those books then?
There are textbook accounts that are also allocated to various schools. It may well be that that purchase was made through one of the school textbook
So that's a
lines,
good question.
as opposed to the
That's a
district-wide.
That was
Right.
a K-5 program,
Well,
anyway.
we can look to see what was encumbered. First of all, the transfer from system-wide professional development to textbooks. The transfer was made within control accounts, so again, this transfer was not taken to the school committee. So here's what was encumbered at the end of the year, meaning it hadn't been purchased yet: Delta Education, and again, Pearson Early Learning. I don't know if that Delta Education is the math books that you're referring to.
Well, the Pearson is, definitely
The Pearson is?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was not spent during the year, it was encumbered at the end of the year, meaning that it should be purchased in fiscal 17 out of money carried over from 2016. So those are the purchases, and that's the detail and the information which led me to report in the forensic audit report that the computer line and the textbook line was used to transfer money at the end of the year, and that was spent at the end of the year. What I'm going to do now is walk you through, and you had discussion with Pat and regarding surpluses and E&D and all of those things. So what I've done for you, and there were many questions that had come to me through the school committee on this topic. So what I've done is for each year, in 2014, there was a revenue surplus. So we have a budget, an actual, and the surplus was $379,418. That surplus is basically a result of additional transportation money, additional Medicaid reimbursement, and the miscellaneous category, which in the past has not been budgeted for. And I think about 50,000 came in 2014. So those accounts accounted for the surplus. There was an appropriation surplus, the budget and the expended, which includes encumbrances. So there was an appropriation surplus of $851,056. So the total surplus for just 2014 activity is $1,230,474. Now, in 2014, of the surplus, $1 million was allocated to fiscal 2015. So what we look at the next slide is, this brings in the E&D. So the unassigned, if you look at the audit report, and by the way, your audit reports have all this information. They tell you how much the surplus is, and the audit report is called an unassigned, meaning it's free to be used. and then it goes to the Department of Revenue, who certifies it as your E&D. That's how you can use it. So the unassigned surplus was $2 million. The 2014 surplus that we just looked at was $1,230,000. Allocated $1 million to the next year's budget. There are other adjustments in this calculation. They're not material. They have to do with encumbrances and how much was spent on prior. It's really small dollars, but you need it to get the numbers to work. So the unassigned surplus at the end of 14 was $2,252,727. Coincidentally, 5% of the 2014 budget was $2,257,727.
Oh my God.
So what that tells us then at the end of 14, between what was encumbered and what was rolled over to reduce assessments in the next year, retain 5% of the budget internally. So we're going to look at 15 and 16 also, but let me just say, you asked for some norms and guidelines. For a city and a town, typically the rating agencies likes to see a governmental surplus of somewhere between 5% and 8%. They figured that is normal and responsible retention of surplus.
For municipalities.
For a city or town.
Yeah.
Now, a district is different because Mass General laws say if it's over 5%, you give it back. Well, you've been giving it back. Okay, everything over the 5% you see here, I mean, $1 million went back. So you are giving it back, you're complying with it, so you can't keep more than 5%.
But the question we have to answer in an upcoming meeting is, do we think 5% is appropriate? That's right.
So if we look at 2015, the revenue surplus, again, $379,418. That, again, is a combination of the transportation, the Medicaid, and the miscellaneous that's not budgeted. Pretty similar to 2014. The appropriation surplus was less, $343,000. So the total surplus, both revenue and appropriations, was $722,854. So the district actually used $1.6 million of surplus to apply against the 2016 budget. So in effect, you used the current year surplus, and you also went into the prior year's E&D to come up with that 1.6 million. So when we look at the calculation in 15, we've got the carryover from 2014 of 2,252,000. We've got your 2015 surplus of 722,000. You've got 1.6 million that's allocated to the 2016 budget. Again, small adjustments. So your unassigned balance at the end of 15 went down to 1,338,000. 5% of the 2015 budget is 2,337,000. So what we see is that you're substantially less than the 5% at the end of 15. It's down somewhat a little below 4% and $1 million less. In addition, I should have mentioned in 14, but also in 15, there was an allocation to an OPEB, money designated for OPEB. That was done in 14, it was carried over and is there again in 2015, but additional funds had not been appropriated to it in 2015. 2016, I know that Pat has gone through this with you. I note that these are unaudited numbers, and most of the information I got was either off audit reports or in this case off your accounting records, so before audit. But the surplus, similar to what was reported earlier, $549,102 in revenue. Again, Pat went through the combination of what those were. Appropriation surplus was a little over $1 million. So the total surplus in 2016 was over $1.5 million. In 2016, $1 million was allocated and targeted against 2017. So of that $1.5 million, $1 million went back to the communities through lower assessments. So looking at the surplus, the unassigned surplus at the beginning of the year rolling over from 15 was 1.3 million. The 2016 surplus was 1.5 million. 1 million carried forward to 2017. I don't know the other adjustments because the audit hasn't been completed. But the unassigned fiscal balance at the end of the year is 1,890,115. What I did not know until tonight, and when I had prepared this slide, is that there was a vote to take transportation surplus and allocate that over to a special fund. This doesn't reflect that, so the 1,890,000 is probably a little bit high, depending on how much was transferred over. But it means that your E&D is probably going to end up being certified, not quite that high, but not substantially less than either. Your 5% of the 2016 budget is 2,450,000. So again, at the end of 16, you will be less than the 5%. Okay, so just wanted to walk you through these figures. And again, when you get the audit report, all of this information, there's a budget to actual for both revenues and expenses, which is on a supporting schedule after the disclosure footnotes. And the unassigned balances are part of the financial statements. So you should be able to get those numbers right from there. Offsets, there were questions about offsets in clarifying and talking about them a little bit more. So first of all, the offsets are included every year in the budget documents, and I will show you an example of that. They are entered into the financial system to reduce budget in certain line items. I'll show you that entry. And then expenditures are transferred over 10 months or once or more per year. And I'll show you how that gets done. So in effect, your general operating budget at gross amount is then reduced by the amount of the offsets. The offsets are monies from revolving and grant funds that are transferred over to your general operating budget to both reduce the budget and to reduce the actual expenditures. This is the budget adjustment. I'm sorry, it's a little too small to see here, but basically these are all the line items within the general operating budget where the budgets get reduced. And hopefully if you have copies of this, you can see it a little clearer than what you can see on the board. And then the next schedule, this is the schedule that's in your budget document. The first three columns are the actuals for fiscal 13, 14, and 15. The next column is the budget for 2016, and the final column is the budget for 2017. And so one of the difficulties and the confusion that I have with offsets is that this schedule shows you the source of the offsets, but when you look back at the actual adjustments to the different line items, there's not a one-for-one correlation. So for example, the first item here, which is, get my cheat sheet, is kindergarten revolving fund. So in 2015, it was 425,000. If I go back here, I can't find which line items relate to that 425,000. Okay, so that's just one piece of what's hard to follow. It's not to say that Pat or someone in the office couldn't reproduce a crosswalk or something to show you how you get from A to B, but it's just not clearly apparent. So that's the budget adjustment. So this indicates that the 2015 actual was 3,723,622. This is a portion of the spreadsheet that I gave to you on offsets, and this is for fiscal 2015. So the budgeted total for the offsets is 3,756,000. The actual on this schedule is 3,723,000, which is pretty close. However, if you look at our number, and it's hard to see, but the total actual that happened was 4,035,000. So the actual transfers from the various revolving and grant accounts that came over was actually over $4 million, not the 3,007,000. So again, there's a break in the link between being able to see and understand exactly what's happening there. So what I've done for you is, this next page is revolving funds for the full-day kindergarten program. So basically what you see in here is a schedule that shows full-day kindergarten salaries, and on the right-hand side, I know you can't see it, but these are adjusting journal entries. And you see in this case, there are entries for each of 10 months in the amount of $30,500 of money that went out of this, that went into this revolving fund and reimbursed the general fund. And again, but which line items get adjusted is more difficult to see.
But isn't this one of those accounts that it has to, it can't, can it fund the general fund?
So it's not, so what you're doing,
No, what was done,
what was done up until you changed things in 2018, if you do. What was done is that you would budget certain costs in the general operating budget with an anticipation that some of those costs are going to be reimbursed by the revolving fund. And in fact, that is what did happen. The difficulty I have with it is, number one, the accounting office has to make all of these journal entries all over the place every single month, and that's a lot of work. And number two, it's not as transparent, because when you look at the records of the revolving fund, you see adjustments. Okay, you don't see actual transactions. Mm-hmm. And to see the transactions, you would have to say, okay, what account in the general fund did that go to? Go look at that account in the general fund, see what was spent out of that account, and see what got reimbursed. And oftentimes the account in the general fund is a lot of other different things besides just these costs. So that's why I say that, when you talk about transparency or just simply ease and understanding, it's just much more complicated. So, so this is the example of full-day kindergarten. This is the example of
John, can I ask a question on that? So, back to the full-day kindergarten. So, those are costs that are borne by parents. They basically pay a fee because we don't fund our full-day kindergarten. And I guess the question that I'm asking, because this is important, and one of the things we're looking to do is close these loopholes. It's twofold. Can we? Is there any way for us to identify whether we're actually costing out the price of this full-day kindergarten properly, number one? And number two, is there any way that we're assured that the parents weren't paying for things other than the kindergarten program?
So if you were charging all expenses directly to the fund, the revolving fund, and could pull out a report and see very clearly what expenses are being paid out of that revolving fund, it would be much easier to do than to have to go into different pieces to get those numbers and try to follow that to the system. So that, again, that supports the recommendation to say that, offsets are complex, time-consuming, and you just can't get the quality reported information out of the system. There are other districts that do it.
So if I hear you correctly, that could be a situation. So parents were paying money and we could have been subsidized, maybe not, but we just don't know because there's been zero visibility into this.
I think it's just
detail.
More difficult to document and answer that question the way it's set up with the offset.
so we don't have an answer to the question.
So I don't have an answer to this.
Thank you.
And before you go too far, back when you had the source of the offsets, the $3,723,000, and then you said it was, we actually put $4 million into it?
So the budget, going back to the schedule that is part of what one of those long, complicated spreadsheets that I gave you for the last meeting, the budget was $3,756,000. The actual that's reported on the budget document itself for 2015 was $3,753,000. So it's a little bit different, but what I'm saying is the actual transfers that went from the revolving fund over to the general fund was, the revolving and grant funds in total was $4,035,000. So more money went over than what was budgeted.
So, do we know where that money is?
Well, it's
The
spread
difference?
out through a whole number of different operating accounts.
Thank you.
So I showed you in the grant general ledger the same thing. You'll see here that there's two separate, and these come right off your accounting records. So these are snapshots of your accounting records. So what you see in there, again, is just a bunch of adjusting journal entries that came out of there and went somewhere into line items over in the general ledger. Next, one of the questions, or a question that was asked to me several different times by different people, and I don't know who, I didn't get who asked the questions, I just got the questions. It was a question of how much of the leases and notes, how much interest was there. And so these are the leases that I included in my forensic report. So it doesn't include HP going back years and years. So these are just the ones that I included in my forensic report. And so the total interest for those leases was $53,844.
Over those 3 years.
Well, it's just the total amount of interest related to the lease.
Right,
Now,
right.
when you pay them off, whether it's this year or over the next 3 or 4, whatever you decide, that's the interest.
But that doesn't include the 10 years of HP loans, leases loans prior to.
That's correct.
Okay.
So there's
So that's
additional
just to
interest
look
for
at 3
prior
years.
loans that were still being paid off during the 14, 15, 16 period. So the last question that was posed to me is, you're in 2017, you voted offsets, so you're stuck with it for 2017. So the question is, how can we monitor 17 to find out how much money do we have to pay off leases, if that's your choice? How do we know what's going on with the revolving funds and the offsets and all of this? So basically, what I'm saying, first of all, there's a quarterly report for the period ended December 31. And it's actually a 6-month report because it's July 1st through December 31. And if you'll recall that I recommended in my last presentation and in the report that there be a projection column in that. And that everything's encumbered, including the salaries. So what I would expect to see is that quarterly report not only being some historical, this is what we budgeted and encumbered and expended, but also what do we anticipate is going to be needed to finish the year. And that should also consider the offsets. So I think, you know, if that's complete and done with all the information, that's going to be very helpful to you. And as you recall, I wanted reports of revolving funds and also, so that, and the report of revolving funds that I gave you, you'll recall that there was a column in there for expended, and then there's a column in there for the offset transfers. And so I think that can be done and presented in that way, so it would be helpful. So the two pieces is in the projection column. So for example, we know that the athletics budget, there is money transferred from the athletic revolving fund, but it's typically not done till the end of the year. So if you look at the report at December 31st, you're going to see costs in there knowing that some of those costs are going to be reimbursed. And so through that projection column, you can make the adjustments to that to say, well, here's what we've expended, but some of this is going to get reimbursed, and we expect more. So that's a way to adjust that so that it shows. So the revolving fund report, which I recommended, and separate that out. I did have a question I didn't know at the time. I think I know the answer now, but in the discussion regarding the lease payoff amounts, I know that in your 2017 budget, there is budget for payments of leases, and so I wasn't sure of the lease payment amount, how much of that is in the budget and how much would be on top of the budget. And I think I understood in discussions with Dan and the superintendent that the HP leases took into consideration the 2017 budget.
Right, a payment has already been made.
A payment that was already made on July 1st.
Right.
However, some of the other leases, there may be places in the budget for some of at least this year's portion of those lease payments that are included in your payoff. So it may not require quite as much as you think to pay off the remaining balances of the leases.
So where are we with the recommendations that John's put on this page? Are they being implemented? What are,
Well, I think that's a broader discussion for us when you're ready to go into next steps. I'm not sure if you want to do that right now or if you want to go to your Q&A. I think that what we had thought about was the notion, first of all, what we've done is we've taken John's recommendations as a separate entity and blocked it, the MASBO recommendations, and then cross-reference. And the intent is that next school committee meeting, we will come forward with a full-fledged presentation to say, this is exactly how we're going to deal with all of this. And again, we started some preliminary discussion this morning at the finance subcommittee because much of it is going to be policy. And so I think that the subcommittee for finance and the subcommittee for policy are going to have to get together in some of these areas because, as John and I said earlier, that's probably a number one place to go after, is to make sure that the policies reflect appropriate practices and expectations. So, you know, as John and I talked before we came to the meeting, I said, I just want to make sure that I'm on the right track with some bulleted points, and to which he said, yes, that's exactly where you need to go. And again, we just started that discussion this morning, so I think that we'll do some follow-up and then come to the school committee and say, okay, this is what we're going to suggest. Is this how you want us to approach it?
yeah, because I would think that we would want to take all of John's recommendations. We can go through this effort, not to, but, you know, so we'll see what you bring forward, and then I would assume that it comes to you folks first on finance.
Yes, so I have some questions on John's presentation. Are we gonna do we wanna get into the fix
We are,
first?
but I
or-
think we've had poor people not poor people, but we've had residents sitting here waiting to ask questions, and I'd like to allow them to do it, but so I wanna hold our questions if we could.
Sure.
So I appreciate, John, are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate everybody's patience, but I think it was important for you to hear from John for some clarification and maybe even a refresher. How many folks have a question? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So, John, you want to go ahead, and then I'll take Mr. Kowalski.
Sure.
And just tell us who you are and the town you represent.
I'm Don Loam, the Bolton Town Administrator, and I have the following question. I, like most people, would like to put the results of the forensic audit behind us and focus on the challenges that lie ahead. However, if I understood one of the comments that one of the attorneys made at the last meeting, at least 2 of the loans that were mentioned were, in her words, illegal because the school district incurred debt while not seeking the approval of the member towns of the district. If that is indeed the case, why weren't any names mentioned, including any lawyers who were involved with these loans, in the audit report? How can the member towns be expected to put this issue behind them if they don't know who is responsible for these actions?
Yeah, regarding what was included in the audit report, in the case of the 2 notes, which were the Clinton Savings Bank notes, I indicated very clearly in the report the person or persons that signed those notes. I didn't name names, but I named positions, and that's easy to figure out.
Well, there was a reference to superintendency, but in the past year and a half or so, we've had 4 different people serving in that role, and I wouldn't want people who served in that role that weren't involved to be taking it, be absorbing some blame for it, whether it's now or 5 years from now when somebody goes back and reads the reports.
That's right, but I clarified that in the opening paragraph to that section where I indicated that the superintendent was the superintendent that was here through December 31st of 2015.
Who was here till December 1st or November
December
30th?
1st of 2015, and that that none of the leases and notes were signed by the interim superintendent that came in after that.
And what about any attorneys who were involved?
The attorneys were not involved in the notes. Attorneys were involved in some of the leases and gave attorney certificates, but there were no attorney certificates that either we or the law firm in communicating with the bank did not see attorney certificates on either of those notes.
Thank you.
Can I just add to the, with respect to the legal opinion, we did prepare a compilation of the documents that indicated who the signatories to the various documents were.
And are those on the website?
They're available if you request them.
We can put them on the website if, Nan, you think it's appropriate.
Pardon?
We can put those on the
Yeah.
website.
And in addition, and I know accompanying the legal opinion were all of the documents themselves, which, had obviously that's where we got our information, from the documents.
Okay.
So, the focus, I won't speak for John, but the focus of the, legal opinion was to identify the issue and figure out how to fix it. But it's not an effort to not provide information.
All right, thank you.
We'll get it online in the same bucket with the MASBO report and the audit, forensic audit. Okay, thank you. Mr. Pawelski, you want to?
I have a host of questions. I'm not sure how much time I have.
So why don't you ask two of them, and then I think there's a gentleman behind you that's got questions, and we'll flip-flop.
We'll flip-flop?
Okay.
Some of these are going to be opinion, but I guess my first question is, were you aware that there was a perceived betrayal of the public trust historically based on the way that and first let me identify myself. My name is Ron Kowalski, 31-year resident of the town of Bolton, former school committee and building committee member. And my first question, in a host of many, is were you aware that there was a perceived betrayal of public trust based on the history in the way that the budgets were presented and discussed at town meeting? And based on your findings, do you believe that that public, or the betrayal of public trust, is effectively justified?
So, I certainly can't speak as to who had feelings of betrayal of public trust. I did not communicate with and have conversation with members of the public as part of the forensic audit that I did, so I can't speak to that. I think there certainly are things in this report that would raise concerns to the public and members here.
Okay, my second question is, from a root cause analysis, will you be having any recommendations to the school committee and the administration on why this occurred, what is going to be done to prevent this from occurring again in the form of a formal corrective action that can be delineated and presented to the town so that we know that this will never, ever happen again?
So my recommendations dealt with many, many aspects of this. Certainly recommendations related to school committee policy. The school committee needs to clarify and make policy clear over what type of authorizations administration has as opposed to what must come to the school committee. Recommendations related to specific reports and the formats of those reports in a way and manner such that they're easily transparent and interpreted both by school committee members and those that attend meetings and seek copies of the reports. So yes, we've made a series of recommendations. The superintendent just spoke to being on the initial step of taking those recommendations, putting them into policy and developing an action plan. And my understanding is that will be discussed at the next meeting.
And when we're wrapping this up, I'm going to hold it for now because I want you folks to talk, but think it's important to identify the fact that the reason we're at this place right now, the reason we have a forensic report, is because the school committee was looking at things. And there's several things that we had started about a year and a half ago to revise in order to kind of find out what is going on, because we had a lot of questions that weren't getting answered or that we weren't able to find the answers to. So I'm going to go through some of the things that were put in place, some of the things that we adopted earlier this year, and one of them is, well, organically it came up, this report, and then some of the recommendations that we have going forward. So we're astutely aware of that concern because we have it too.
Yes, and I applaud you and I applaud the school committee for focusing on fiduciary responsibility and also for retaining experts, in their respective fields to provide this level of detail.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that just briefly?
You're taking away his time, but go ahead. Real quick. Do you feel guilty? That's good. Go ahead.
No, it's an explanation to run. So this has been all about transparency and clarity for the last year and a half. So when we did ask questions, we didn't get answers. We're looking for best business practices, et cetera. That's how we actually brought NASBO in.
Right.
Okay, NASBO came forward with further recommendations, which led to more questions that we had. And then when we didn't necessarily feel that we were getting that level of clarity that we needed in addition to that, this sort of led to where we are now.
Yes, and I've read both reports.
And so the MASBO, it's not just John's recommendations, but it's also the MASBO recommendations that we're going to be using to implement best practice in formal policy reports and generating the clarity that we feel that the public, and hopefully with the public's input, we'll be able to nail down.
Okay.
I'll defer, but I'd like to come back.
Yes. Hi.
We'll take turns. I'm Paul Antonangeli, Bolton resident. I get a lot of my information off of the website and through the newspapers, so I can't guarantee all of it, but my first question is actually a three-part question. Who wrote the specifications for everything purchased and leased? Would those specifications have passed the school committees or gotten the school committee's approval for district use? And was the state bid process followed through all of these purchase and leases?
Okay, the answer sounds like a combo of Pat on the state bid process. Would you know that?
I can maybe start with the last one. The state, one of the things that Carrie and I looked at was compliance with Chapter 30B, and from what we could see is that 30B procurement policies were in fact complied with respect to this. With respect to specifications, I'll just speak in I'm not sure it's customary that specs go before the school committee, but maybe Pat can speak to that.
I'm not sure. I really wasn't involved in any of the procurement at that point, but if there were specs that needed to be written for something and we were to go out to bid, then that would have been done for most of the cases there in the facilities department.
And I also think that most of this equipment was purchased off the state bid list.
Right.
And so that's that's why we feel confident that the procurement, from a procurement perspective, that there was compliance.
And then just a quick follow-up to that, do we still have all of the equipment that was leased or purchased, and is any of it missing?
That's a bit of a question. It's an interesting question that you're bringing up. Now, I can't sit here and say yes, it's all here. So, and before I go to that question, can I just add to your question with regards to procurement? I think is a really important question because that's an area that I think we've delved into extensively since I've been in here because I think that has been problematic from my perspective. So just so that you know, and I know Pat's shaking her head, yes. So that's a change that we made right out of the gate, like July 5th. So I just want to speak to that. With regards to equipment, that's something that we're still looking at this point in time. And I think that we will probably, we had some discussion this morning with our finance subcommittee, and you'll see us come forward with something at the presentation that we make at the next school committee meeting in 2 weeks. So you'll see something come out at that point in time. Brian.
Yeah, Brian Boyle from Bolton. This is a question for the attorney, and it might be premature, but at the last meeting, you guys reviewed a few different options about how to bring certain agreements into compliance, and one of them was option 2. I was just hoping you could talk through a little bit how that actually achieves compliance legally, and also whether option 2 would leave the district with any potential residual liabilities. You know, we sort of paid these things off and got them off the plate this year. You know, is there anything else hanging out there that we should be aware of?
So Nan, when you answer, I just want you to speak your
Sure, sorry.
I'm deaf. So.
Okay, so I do. Okay, with respect to how does it achieve compliance, we can't rewind the clock. It's not going to correct past wrongs, but what it will do is bring the district into compliance as of right now, as of when we remediate and going forward. So that's the, you know, there's no way as a lawyer that I could come up with a way to undo what was done in the past. And so that's, you know, there's, as you point out, there was, I think, 3 options that we suggested could be used to remediate this. It's not going to make the former transactions compliant. It's not going to turn them into compliant. We either have to enter into compliant transactions or, you know, pay them off. And with respect to residual liabilities, that's not really something, as an attorney, I can address with the community about what the liabilities are and the natures. That's something that's more appropriately discussed, you know, with the client, who was the school committee.
Yes.
Just real quick, I don't know if it's a Burke question or a name question. Sorry, Mark from Lancaster, by the way. Under the provisions of Chapter 7116P, the leasing mechanism, one of the provisos is that the equipment must be used for educational purposes. What is the state rather lax in their definition of educational purposes, or because it seems like we did that for a tractor?
Yes, and I would say, rather than use the word lax, I would say that it's broadly construed. And this is something that we used, you know, that we looked at the outset of this inquiry when John first brought it to our attention. So the educational purposes is broadly construed. And so it would include equipment used to, you know, assuming that it was leased,
sure,
you know, used to, in the service of the district.
All right, Mr. Polsky.
Okay, during your forensic audit, did you notice any indications of creating a culture of cost reduction and cost avoidance as opposed to surplus management? And there's a huge difference between savings versus savings that are being projected based on not spending monies that were in the budget.
So the primary focus of this investigation was not, you know, to investigate and determine what cost savings measures had been taken. So no, I wouldn't say that I focused on that.
Okay.
What I will say is that, you know, I think with the interest payments on the leases and the loans, I stated before, and you saw the surplus numbers tonight, that to incur interest when the district had sufficient funds to pay for these without incurring interest costs would be an example of a cost savings, that opportunity that wasn't taken.
Next question. Based on the complexities associated with the budget and what you've identified, does Nashoba, in your opinion, have the financial acumen and the resources to be able to effectively manage this type situation? Would additional hiring be something that you could be advocated based on the forensic audit? Could a closer working relationship, not to create more work for the town administrator, but could a closer working relationship with the town administrator and the advisory committee be advisable? And would they effectively benefit overall the town, you know, in the management?
Right. So throughout the course of the forensic audit, I've had an opportunity to work with the current superintendent and the interim, or whatever the title now is for Pat's position, and feel confident that, you know, that the staff you have here have the background and knowledge and skills to do this work. I'm recommending some pretty radical changes in the way some things are being done, so there may be at times a request for assistance or help. Certainly MASBO is always there. Participation in the various you know, MASBO events and training programs will help. I know that Pat just went through the purchasing program with the Inspector General's office. So I do personally feel confidence that the people here, I don't think you need to hire another position.
And that's
I don't know, and haven't looked at, again, subsequent to 2016, I know that, you know, Pat was promoted to at least fulfilling this position. I don't know where the replacement as the accountant, and I didn't look at that, so I can't speak to that particular position.
And where people wear multiple hats, you know, I'm not, again, raise the bridge, lower the water. Is it possible that more emphasis could be put on grants, effectively generating more revenue, or somebody that's going to focus on how do we effectively reduce costs, as opposed to, and again, this is an editorial comment, I've gone before the town for the last 10 years asking for detailed questions about what cost savings, why is it always a standard, we need a 3%, we need a 4%, we need a 5% increase? What is going to be, what's going to happen, or what's going to change to effectively break that cycle? You know, and maybe that's a question for later on. But every year there's been an increase that has been voted, and at the town meeting, the question's been why? You know, what's the reason for the increases?
what represents the increase.
What represents the increases?
Yeah.
And you never get the details.
Well, you know, I'm not going to make excuses for anyone, present or past, but I will say that I hope that if you look at some of the work that's been done over the past year and a half, that there's a level of confidence with the people that are sitting in these chairs and the incredible amount of hard work. And I'm not looking for kudos for anyone. I'm not looking for any bones here. I'm basically just letting you know that there is no way we would have gotten to this point without these people in these seats. They have been worked so hard, asked questions, you know, followed the threads. From a personnel perspective, we've got people who are current educators, so they keep us honest. So there's finance guys that drive me crazy because they're always asking questions that I don't necessarily understand, so they've got to explain it to me. Then we turn around and say to the educators who are on the school committee, so you see what they're talking about? Is this going to mess us up? How's this going to impact the schools? And now that Brooke is here, it's just an amazing, and then we've got project managers that know how to like put things together. We have a really unique group of people here. I think the responsibility we all feel is how do we make sure that the visibility that we're finally starting to get into is broadened and it's presented in a way that the community can understand it, those like me can understand it, and perpetuated. What are the guardrails to make sure that over the next 3, 5, 10 years, whatever policy revisions we have, and there are several policies that aren't even on the books right now that I'm going to be asking the school committee to include that provide those guardrails. It's up to the people, once that's put in place, once the budget books are done, once the policies are revised, once the school committee has developed a manual so that institutional knowledge, every time someone leaves the school committee, we lose all that institutional knowledge. That's a big problem. Imagine what these people have learned in the past year and a half and through this process is gone. So we've got to find a way to build that institutional knowledge and force school committees to read it, to revise it, and to adopt it. So I hear what you're saying, But I would say that I think that the group of people that are sitting here, and I won't speak to anyone before, there's no reason to do that, certainly will be and have proven that they're serious about this. We know when we get up in front of town meeting this year, we're gonna have some tough questions. But I think we're gonna be better able to answer them based on what we've been through and what we know. And I don't know if that helps you, but I'm telling you 100% that is exactly where we're at.
Well, I would like to be in a position where there is, in my estimation, a restoral of that public trust that I think is lacking. I think in certain circumstances, and I'll speak for myself, being on a fixed income, situations like that where you don't understand where your dollars are going, and when you read the MASBO report and the forensic auditor's report, it is to a large degree infuriating based on the previous questions that were asked. And I am an advocate of good education and always have been, for the region. But I want to make sure that the taxpayer is well represented and that the monies that are spent are effectively spent effectively, and we know where the money is going.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something, as frustrated as you are, I'm comfortable saying I'm frustrated too. And I've known about this for a little bit longer, and it's been a really bitter pill to swallow because I'm a resident, I'm also a parent of kids in the school, and I also have a responsibility along with these other 7 people, 2 of them are here, to do exactly what you're saying. Is the money that we're generously giving to the towns, our towns are pretty generous about not complaining, right? If the school committee gets up or the administration gets up at the annual town meeting and says, this is what we need and this is why, the towns have been pretty good. They'll ask the questions. But I think we now realize we need to understand a little bit more, because there's got to be the balance between the programs that we want, that we've wanted, that we've been fighting for $10,000. I remember Brian Burke, selectman from Stowe, saying to me last year, when you get to the point where you're scraping and screaming over $10,000 back and forth, you're done. And he was right. But the truth of the matter is, now we learn, well, there was actually more in there that we could have pulled for our programs. So we've got a lot of work that we know we have to do in tandem with the administration. And whatever frustration you're feeling, I'm not going to speak for each one of you, but I can tell you I'm very frustrated. But I'm not going to let that stop us from the work that we started and are going to continue to do.
Yeah. And the final comment that I have is really gets to, and I'm not sure if you even I don't think you addressed this, as part of the upcoming contract negotiations. Governor Baker has been a strong advocate of ensuring that, from a healthcare standpoint, people roll into the group insurance commission. And I understand that there's the opportunity and the leeway associated with ensuring that you would go to another source for health insurance as long as it's cost effective. And in the previous administrations, I've asked the question, I've asked that same question of the town administration, that has been answered. Is that cost analysis going to be done as part of the contract negotiations? Healthcare healthcare and the whole issue of healthcare is a significant cost. And the GIC analysis should be a fundamental part of your contract negotiation.
I'm just saying to the chair, it's kind of a difficult one to to respond to. I think that, I know that we've had some discussion with somebody outside of the school district relatively recently on this very topic. So I would want you to know that it's on our radar. I would not want to say anything else beyond that right now.
Understood.
But we hear that and we're doing research into it. And I think because we're in the middle of negotiations, I can't say anything beyond that.
Understood.
Okay. Sir?
Thank you for entertaining my questions.
Oh, thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Madam Chair, question, Stan Starr from Huntington Select Board. What conversation input is the school committee given relative to the OPEB balloon that will be coming our way? The other, obviously, that's a biggie. I don't know what the budget is containing allowances for post-employment benefits, but what are your thoughts on that one? I know our town has begun to fund that project. It's inevitable. And so I didn't know where you stand in the budget part of it.
So one of the challenges that the Finance Subcommittee adopted this year in its goals was to come up with a perspective and a point of view, not just a point of view, but I use that phrase as what is it that we're going to do and our philosophy on OPEB and start to fund it. At what level will we start funding it? I completely understand it. In fact, I think when John mentioned there was $150,000 in the OPEB line item a couple of years ago, it was a struggle to get that in there, and Lynn will remember it. But we do want to make a commitment. It's going to come up through the Finance Subcommittee. I like to caution people on this because it sounds like a massive number, and it is, but it's based on projections and actuarial tables. And every year it fluctuates for us because the budget's so big.
What's the present value of that lump sum?
Well, actually, we just got our OPEB valuation, I think last week, did we not, Pat?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, for example, and she's absolutely right, I mean, it varies from year to year because your staff turns over, I want to say, and Mark, you can maybe fill me in, or fill in any holes, it's around 15 million down this year, is that correct? Pat and Mark, I turn to you to...
The report of 3 years ago estimated in this year, the liability overall will be around $55 million.
And we've got funded how much so far?
Well, wait, tell them the rest. What's the new number?
And with the income of the Affordable Care Act and various other changes in the healthcare regime, our liability is currently estimated under the actuaries regime at about $43 million. Naturally, if our healthcare regime changes in some radical way, that number could double. So it really depends on what's going on surrounding the school as well as our own funding of the
what have you funded?
But your question is, what are we going to do about it? We've
Two
got
questions, Lorraine. The first one being, how much is currently funded?
I think, based on what we know, I think my involvement, $175,000 is all that we've been able to budget.
So we're almost there.
No, we're not even close, but it was a struggle to get even there. So we will have a point of view. It will become a recommendation from the school committee's perspective. And given what we now know, it's a little bit easier for us to get where we need to be. And we're not going to be making I'm not going to be able to get behind a $2 million, OPEB contribution every year.
Just want to make sure it's on the radar, Lorraine.
Absolutely, yeah.
If I could just follow up too, I know Pat and I had the same sort of discussion, so it's also on our radar as we're talking about building the budget. This very topic came up, so I just want you to know that we are talking about it.
I have a question for John. So when we're talking about extended day and those types of accounts, can the contribution, the OPEB contribution for the employees that work in that program come out of that account?
You have to go back. Each revolving fund has its set of rules in Mass General laws as to what can be included and what is not included. And there are some cases where they say if you're charging a full-time employee to this fund, you also need to pay all the benefits of that fund, which would include an OPEB contribution. There are other revolving funds that you're not allowed to put any salaries into. So for each fund, you have to go back to the Mass General laws.
So that would be one of the things that I would ask you folks to do, is to find out which of those programs can be truly self-funded, including the OPEB contribution for those employees, which then would be outside of the contribution that we would be making for the general population.
In addition, many of your accounts are federal grants, and federal grants themselves will be clear about what benefits they are willing to fund through the grant.
Okay.
And not oftentimes do you see the OPEB liability.
That's exactly right.
As part of the grant benefit lines.
Grants for the most part are so targeted in terms of their purpose, and that's really where the money needs to be spent.
That's where most of the salaries are, is in grants, not much less so in the revolving funds. But some of the revolving funds do have salaries in them.
All right. Does that give you an answer?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Don Hawks, Selectman of Stowe. To the extent that there is all this intertwined spaghetti of conflicting regulations and general laws governing what you just described, has the school committee, or are you willing to involve our collective representatives and senators to address that problem? We are doing, I'm launching something in Stowe that's similar on assessments for certain classes of property, and the assessors say, well, we're hamstrung by conflicting pieces of legislation. So I'm asking Kate Hogan, our representative, and perhaps Senator Eldridge, at preliminary stages of exploring this, can you help in that? My question is, could you folks also involve, as a region, we have several different reps and senators, can you help solve it? Because if it's a problem here, it's going to be problems for other districts governed by the same general laws.
Yes, and we also have resources with other school districts in the area through the MASC organization. So yes, we could engage them. I think we need to get a perspective, so that, yes. But I think we need to get a perspective on, finally, this is our year to make a commitment on what OPEB contributions are going to be as a component of the budget moving forward. So yes, thank you.
So just.
And then I want to, yeah,
FinCom, we have had this conversation as of, I think it was last week, we began having some more serious conversation about this. And, you know, the idea of figuring out just how do we figure this whole ball of wax out.
But we knew that that was going to be part of the budget.
Absolutely. It's actually one of the FinCom goals for the year to do, but we are creatively looking at some sustainable ways of being able to address this.
Right.
That's really where we're at.
It's substantive, yeah.
Okay, any other questions from you? Yes, I'm sorry, yeah.
It's all right.
That's
I have
okay.
another multi-part question, and this is also, I got this off of your website, Exhibit A, Schedules 3, 4, 5, and 6. It lists authorizing the Bank of New York to invest in Goldman Sachs along with distributions from that account. What is that account? How much money, or maybe not how much money is still in it, but is it still being used, and who has authorization on that account?
Okay, but what's your first name again?
The schedule you find was the schedule that Nan created, yeah.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So are you, so I'm looking at Exhibit A here, and that's the
Schedule
July.
3, 4, 5, and 6 all list Bank of New York and Goldman Sachs.
Oh, it's the chart of agreement.
Okay, and I think what that was is that initially, correct me if I'm wrong, John, initially the escrow account that was used to purchase the equipment through the HP Financial was set up with Goldman Sachs, and now it's Deutsche Bank. It was.
Yeah, I didn't go back to the HP leases in early years.
Okay.
So I didn't see that, but the most recent leases, the escrow agent is Deutsche Bank, and money's been deposited in Deutsche Bank. And I have the schedules of what was purchased out of those, so there's no money left in the 2014, 15, and 16 lease accounts. That has all been spent.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but this information was just taken off an historical document that's how the accounts were set up. So I was just reporting information from documents. I don't know the specifics.
And then I have one last question. Would any of these leases and purchases be considered misappropriation of funds?
You know, what I would say about that as an attorney is that, you know, misappropriation of funds is generally a criminal matter, and I'm not really in a position to make that determination and/or to advise, you know, anyone beyond the school committee regarding potential liabilities.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Any other questions? Anyone? So I'm going to turn the tables back to the school committee to ask some questions now. So for all of you, please feel free to stay. We will be getting, as soon as the school committee asks their questions, to what are we gonna do about the outstanding loans and leases balances. But I wanna thank all of you for making the trek out here, and I know that it's late. All right, Neil, you have a question?
So, John, on the 2014 computer hardware transfers that you talk about here, I have a few questions on that. The first thing it states, the minutes indicate transfers requested tonight are mostly due to the movements of salary and insurance lines, and then you're stating that there's no discussion of computer hardware. Who is it that actually was making that transfer according to the minutes, or requesting that transfer?
Request for the transfer came from the assistant superintendent.
The assistant superintendent, okay. Thank you. And then the money that was transferred in, we've got a list of computers that were purchased. I know that we have, I'm assuming that the HP leases are represented in that overall dollar figure?
No.
They're not. So
No.
this is in addition to the HP lease figures.
That's correct.
So if I understand this correctly, under computer hardware, we're looking at an original budget of $314,000 with a transfer of $146,000, and I'm just rounding up, or rounding off, with a total expended of $438,904 in computer hardware, and that does not include the money that we purchased additional hardware with HP. Is that correct?
So in the total amount expended of $438,000, it would include the 2014 lease payments.
Just the lease payments?
Just the
Okay.
lease payments.
So-
Because you don't pay through your appropriations for the equipment that's purchased through the leases.
So were additional, were additional equipment purchased beyond the lease payments? Am I making sense on that? So there's purchasing power that we have with HP. Does the $438,000 minus the lease payments represent the purchasing power that we had, or was there actually more money that was used for purchases?
So the $438,000 expended, subtracting the lease payments, were spent on computer equipment, part of which is included in the schedule of items purchased at the end of the year. But there was also items purchased during the year.
So then, I know that I've seen invoices for the HP lease purchases. It looks like there's a substantial amount of money that was, in addition to that, that was used to purchase computer hardware.
Yes.
Do you have those specific invoices? I mean, are there the records of those invoices and where the money went?
There are records of those invoices, yes.
Okay, so that's something we can come back and actually cross-reference invoices versus inventory and figure out in accounting as far as dollars spent versus what we received?
Yes.
And then was there, or is there a disposition of surplus policy that's been followed with recording any things deemed as surplus within that computer hardware prior to them being disposed or whatever is done?
I've not seen a policy related to.
I guess, do we have a change, do we have records of those particular, we do have a policy, but do you have any indication that that policy was being followed and that there are records that are established when they take computers out of service and anything that might have been deemed surplus?
Oh, you're talking about surplus inventory?
Yes.
I did not, that was not part of the procedures that I did. It was to go into the inventory and location of the equipment and equipment that's been disposed of.
Okay. All right. I believe that I have just reached my peak of questions.
All right, so we'll come back if you got another one. Nicole, do you have any questions? You can go next. Kathy?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time understanding about the loans that were off books. Were the funds represented some way in the budget? If something is in the budget, how can it be, how do we account for the money we spend for it if it's off books?
Okay, so in a lease purchase, there are separate transactions. The first is the execution of a lease and the lease proceeds being used to purchase the equipment. So that's one transaction that all of those were off books. The second piece of that is over the years, you make payments to pay off the lease. The lease payments have been included in the budget and have been processed through the warrants and paid every year.
Would that have been something that the auditors that do our audit every year should have been suspicious about, or, because it says, I think it's on, it's in page 22 of the audit report, that the lease and escrow documents were made available to the district's auditors.
So there is, I won't say disagreement, but whether or not the auditors got the lease documents or there's a different opinion between the auditors and the district as to whether they saw and get copies of the lease documents.
Okay.
Thank you.
No more questions from you? Thank you. Lynn?
There's the Clinton Savings Bank. Did we ever with this, the mowers, where the loan was said to have been put into our district account, but there is no evidence that it ever went into our district account?
We believe it did not go into your district account based on discussion with both the auditors and with the business office. Because the proceeds would have been on books, it would have been accounted for had they been deposited into the accounts. We don't know who the vendors are, and we know that the mowers were purchased. We have belief that there are mowers that were purchased with that lease and that they physically exist. But I don't have and did not find records of who the vendor was and how the payment was made.
And so the bank, so you believe that the money went directly to the vendor, but that's not what the bank has. The bank has that they had given us the money.
It's called a disbursement document that was filed that's included with the note documents indicates that the dispersal was made to the district.
Does that seem right?
No.
So what do we do about it? I mean, shouldn't we know where the money went?
I think you can make some further steps by going to the bank and asking them to go into their records and pull whatever disbursement and who it was made out to. Typically, it's be a bank check. And the bank check would be made out either to a vendor or to the district. And if it wasn't deposited in the district account, the backside of the check will give you an identification as to where the check was deposited. So that's a step that could be done.
So we need to chase that down.
Say it again?
Are you directing Evan to do that?
Yes, I think Brooke just wrote it down.
I just wrote it down.
Just checking.
Yeah. Mark?
I imagine you've encountered other districts which have unusual budgeting where there's activity that's not really budgeted the way it's seen for our revolving funds. Is it extremely rare that this occurs, or is it surprisingly not unusual that school committees don't understand the full range of the activity that they should be budgeting for?
So I would say it's not unusual for school committee members to say, what are these revolving funds and how are they being used, and I don't understand them. I do hear that a lot. Hence my recommendations to make this more transparent. But this is not the first engagement I've been asked a similar question about revolving funds and surplus being built up in them, or over time balances being depleted.
So one of my questions to John, and I just want to share it with all of you, was, so now we've got recommendations, Pat's already put a lot of those recommendations into place anyway. I mean, not all of them, but many of them, because she's been working with John for several months now. My question is, so it looks like we're on the right path, we're on a good trajectory, but at some point, I would feel more confident to have John come back in and just spot check us. And that doesn't mean it's a full forensic audit. And I suggested that to John, does that make sense? Or, you know, am I just being nervous, it's time for us to fly? And I think you said at this time next year.
Yeah, I said it's not unusual to come back, you know, to see what the implementation of the recommendations has been and report back. But I would go through a full cycle, a full year cycle, because you want the 2018 budget to be developed, and you would want to have an opportunity for the reports that we're requesting to be developed. And so I would say it would take a good year cycle.
And I think that you'll feel more comfortable with that too, right? Get another
absolutely.
full year in there, so that would be great. You know, well, we can talk about that, but I think folks, we need to consider that. Yeah.
One of the strengths, I think, John, that you bring to us is that you were here all those years ago, and you know this district inside out intimately. And I think that for you to come back in a year is a great suggestion. And let us know, are we making the right movement on the trajectory as you were just describing right now? Or have we strayed, or do we need to have greater fidelity in this area or that area? So I fully support the notion of you coming back, and I just think it would be a great confidence builder for the community, because this is a fellow that has been here for years now, through thick and thin with this district. I think it's a great idea.
I just want to say, since I'm not going to be here next year probably, I would just ask, I would love to have John back. I want him built into the budget.
So do I.
I don't have a question, but I want you to answer Superintendent Clenchey to the concerns of the public that we have still a very high-performing district that is functioning day to day, educating our kids, taking care of our kids, and this particular exercise has been to delve into some very specific, important things that needed to be dealt with. But the whole time this is going on, we still have a great district.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. And to be honest with you, I mean, we've got, I know that you had alluded to this too the other day, Chairman Romoska, but we've got a great team in place right now. And I think a very self-reflective team. And even this morning, and I think, Dawn, if you want to say anything, I know that you sat in on one of our finance subcommittees, and that's typical of the type of work that group does. And I think that we, for example, even this morning, I put something forward and I said, poke holes in it. Tell me if I'm not thinking right on this. Like, help me through this. And you know, it's that kind of a relationship, and I think we've got that type of relationship with our principals right now. You feel such a nice rhythm of, for example, we have large and small scale meetings right now where we've got just a small nucleus and then we've got a larger group that comes in. You can feel that dynamic. If you were here today when you couldn't find parking spots this morning in the parking lot, it's because we've got all kinds of work happening with literacy right now as we're developing a district-wide literacy plan, right? So that we're all talking the same language. The excitement in this room, I was walking in the hallway and I had some teachers come out and said, this is such rich discussion. And we can't lose sight of that. This is an incredible district. I mean, when I looked to make application out of the department, this was so specific. This is where I wanted to land for so many reasons. But the fact that it's high functioning, the fact that it's so supportive, especially from your communities. And even tonight, I look around the room and I see we've got Bolton represented here. We've got our town administrator from Bolton here. We've got selectmen from Lancaster. We've got selectmen from Stowe. Like, it doesn't get better than this, and we cannot lose sight of this. You talked frustration, and normally a superintendent doesn't say, listen, I'm frustrated too, but I've got to tell you, this has been so frustrating for me. And I'm not complaining because you know I don't, my job, as I see it, is to take what's broken and get it right, fix it right. Which is why I love the idea of John coming back in a year to say, poke holes in it, have we gotten it right or not? But I would totally agree with you, we can never lose sight of the fact that this is a fantastic district to educate our kids in, to work in, and to just thoroughly enjoy. I'm looking forward to getting things in play so that we can focus again back on education and away from the fiscal administrivia. But I would also say that I remember a mentor saying, as a superintendent, you can mess up with a lot of things, but you cannot mess up with the money. And right now, I feel, not that I've messed up, and I'm not saying that anyone has, but I think we can do a better job with best practices in place. And I think with John's good guidance, I think with the Maslow report that's been done, and a strong FinCom and a strong school committee, we are up to this and we'll get it done. Sounds like Larry the Cable Guy, doesn't it? Let's
Yeah,
go.
that was good.
I just want to close that full circle because, and it's not going to turn into a big self-kudos thing here, but what Nicole, what you had to say has to do a lot of testimony. It's a testament to the teachers in the districts, the administrators in the district, and honestly, I know just an inkling of how many hours that Brooke and her administrative team have had to put into things, whether it's facility issues that we've dealt with at the beginning of the year, asbestos, lead paint, sewer issues, just here in Bolton alone. And now these budgetary things, the forensic audit, the massive amount of time, tons of legal issues that we've been going through. For no one to actually feel all the bumps in the road that have been happening this year, I think is a testimony to some good solid leadership in not allowing that to escape these four walls here and affect the rest of the district. So that's all I'm going to say at that point.
All right, are we, thank you all. I just want to say thank you so very, very much for actually coming back to help us yet again. And John from Lawrence and Heath and Company, I hope that you're willing to come back and talk to us next year and just do a check-in with us, because the continuity really is valuable. I truly appreciate the guidance and expertise. The collaborative approach, you acted like you were one of the Nashoba folks. So thank you for that. And Nan, we're gonna be seeing more of you, I'm sure, so we love you too. But to the school committee, before we move on, this has been a long, long road. So happy to say we now have so much more knowledge and we know where we need to go, and we can be a lot more focused and specific about the contributions that we make. Because I really want to add programs. I really want to get into the schools and see the kids do things, and I know you do too. So thank you for the integrity over these past several months, and the professionalism. So with that, I'm going to move it real quick. And Brooke, I don't know what I'm doing here, so I'm going to turn that thing on. And then you can't see it, I'm sorry, for the school committee members, it's in the packet. So one of the things that we have to answer is, so what are you gonna do about it, right? Where are we gonna go from here? So I sat down, and all of the things that we talked about that are either in our goals for this year or that we've started last year and are gonna continue, kind of put them in a grid. And I'm just gonna do a cursory review of this. We'll come back to it probably in the next meeting, because I'm gonna ask Brooke to come back and share her administrative, where are we gonna go from here too, which you had alluded to. So if you look at this document, it just looks at FY 17, 18, and 19. The green is, what are those things that we adopted last year in FY 16 that we're continuing? The MASC training modules or professional development. It may not be MASC, but I'd like to recommend that we have a new policy that indicates, leader? There's bubbles on the screen. They're not bubbles. I'd like policy to start thinking about building a professional development policy for the school committee, so that we can continue to get good at what we need to do, and actually more for the people that come in, because you come in and for the first year you're kind of deer in the headlights. We will continue the annual budget book, but I'd love for you guys to look at creating a policy for that too, so that we don't lose the momentum. We did implement guidelines for non-union personnel tuition reimbursement last year. That was a really big deal through personnel. And that protocol was set up, but the personnel subcommittee is continuing to look at all of those contracts going forward when they become, when it's time for them to be renewed. That was an oversight, so we gotta continue that. And then what we said we were gonna do this year, which we actually did do, is the due diligence on the annual auditing firm selection. And one of the suggested approaches in the proposed piece is, you know, do we have a policy that indicates every 5 years? We have a relationship now, there's nothing negative, but I just think in looking at due diligence, more than 5 years with the same auditor without going out for a full look-see, it doesn't feel responsible to me. So if we don't, maybe we should look at that to kind of force that, take a step back and look at the landscape. It may end up that the firm that you're using now is what you end up using, but according to the 30B regulations, even though school committees don't need to go out for bid for auditing firms, I think maybe we should institute that, because it just means we're doing our due diligence. So, and then MASC, so we know our policies, some of them are 13, 14 years old, and the world has changed quite a bit.
One of them just turned 20 too, didn't it?
Yeah, and so that's just not okay. So rather than rely on the administration to come forward with the policies that need to be reviewed, it made more sense. We've already started, MASC is already reviewing those. And I think I did tell Susan that Dorothy from MASC said she will fast track our finance policies. So finance and policy, have a little love session because we need to get those going. John's given us some great direction. And the school committee manual. The school committee manual, I know it sounds like just another document, but again, when people come into the school committee, you don't know what you're doing. We have to take that, we take that, charting the course, it's one day. You can't possibly learn everything you need to know. The regulatory stuff alone is crazy. So that's being worked on, it's in process. You're gonna see the second outline from Kathy at the upcoming meeting. The proposed things are to, have Pat implement the recommendations in the forensic report. I think some of that's already being done. I have every confidence it will, but we just need to make sure it's on the docket. And implement best practices from MASBO and the forensic audit. Sounds like you're already doing that. Well, you're putting it together so that we can look at it. And then I'd like to suggest every 3 to 5 years conducting a MASBO review. And the reason I say that is it was $5,900. Because we did that, it gave us a lot of answers. It gave us a lot more questions, but it's what John used as a roadmap to start looking at doing his work. And I think if we can, MASBO was what triggered us to say, we need more. There's something's not, it's not making sense. We don't understand it. And so maybe that every 3 to 5 years, if we create a policy around that, it's just another check. It's just another check in the quiver, and I think we need to consider that. So think about it, come back with your recommendations. Some of these you might say, toss them out, we don't want them. You may think that there are others that are more important or as important. I would just say, be cognizant of the amount of work that we're taking on, because while we've started the vast or are doing all the yellow or green and purple things right now, still a lot of work, so let's prioritize the stuff we need to do. Okay. All right, next section is the what are we going to do with the prior year's leases and loans? And I just want to remind everyone we had 3 options that Nan put forth. Nan, I should probably turn it over to you if you need. Do you have your? Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to you. What do we need to do? Why do we need to do it? And do we need to do it now?
Okay.
Okay.
Do we need to do it now? I think the answer to that is yes, at least we need to start the process now. Okay, so there's basically three options here. And the first option would be to execute new agreements with each of the lessors. Leasing Innovations is done, right? John, that's all paid up and done. And if we did that, if we went to the lessors, and actually I'm not just limiting to the lessors, the two Clinton Savings Bank loans, basically approach the entities and indicate that the transactions were entered into not in compliance with Chapter 71, and we need to renegotiate the terms of the loans or the balance of the loans. And if we did that, then we would still have to get approval, whatever we negotiated, from the member towns. Either notice the Board of Selectmen and they have 60 days to veto, or convene a district-wide vote of all the citizens. So that's option one. Maybe by shorthand you can just refer to it as renegotiate the current agreements. Option two, if you have sufficient funds in the budget, without raising the budget for FY 2017, by a 2/3 vote, you can vote to pay off the outstanding loans and leases. And for that option, because you're not increasing the overall budget, you don't need to go to the member towns. And then the third option is if you have insufficient funds, or if paying off the leases and loans would result in an increase in the budget, you can still vote to do that with a 2/3 vote, but again, you'd have to take that out to the member towns because it's resulting in an increase in the budget. So those are basically the three options. Renegotiate, if you have sufficient funds, take a vote to pay them off. If you have insufficient funds, you take a vote to pay them off and increase the budget, but that needs approval by the member towns. And so, with respect to approval from the member towns, the funds cannot be, you can't enter into the agreements until there is approval. And so that's at least a 60-day or a district-wide election process. So that's about.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you to.
Sure.
Because you made a statement at the last meeting, and I think we need you to substantiate it.
So from my perspective, I'm really reticent to go for either option one or option three. I think that option two is the best. Now, as I had said to the Chair of Moscow, I've had a little bit more time to synthesize this whole piece because we've been working so closely with John for the last several months. So although there were some things that were new to me the other day, it wasn't all new to me. So I've had time to kind of synthesize. Pat and I've had lots of opportunity to chat about this. We've chatted with Nan, we've chatted with John about it. So she and I were not surprised by this. And however, I would also say, at one point in time, we thought that renegotiation was going to be the only way we could do it. I remember that. I think that was late November, early December, thinking that's how we're going to do it, or that's what we would recommend. And then we started looking into it a little bit deeper. And so we had some communication again with the notion, and I want to go on record saying this is not being cavalier. This is not saying, gee, let's pay it. It goes back to that frustration. This is frustrating for me as well, like I said before, to work through, because it's a struggle for me, because I think this is $200,000 that could go somewhere else, except that's not where we are, and so we have to look and say, of the three options, what is the best option? So we did sit down and we talked to Nan about it, and we said, okay, if we looked at option two and we pay this off, what could this look like? So we had a couple of things, a couple of different ideas, and I want to just run this past the full school committee, but I did run it past the finance subcommittee this morning too. We did get more money, and Pat had alluded to this earlier tonight. We had received at one point in time additional funds for transportation, so we've got a bit of a cushion in that line right now that we feel comfortable in putting forward. We could take $50,000 out of that line. Pat had also alluded earlier to the fact that some of our salary lines, when you put a budget forward, for example, you don't always know how many retirees you might have or who's gonna leave the district. It's gonna be a high-paying member, or a high-paying salary that's leaving or whatnot. So I wanna be clear that that's how you sometimes get to that salary surplus on those salary lines. And so when we took a look at the various schools, the high school had the most amount of surplus as such right now that we felt we could go into. But each one of those schools has a piece that we could dip into from the salary lines that we feel comfortable right now as we do the projection out to the rest of the end of the year. We feel we could take about $75,000 collectively off of those salary lines. The electricity, what was budgeted for the electricity and what we're projecting right now to finish up the school year, we see a potential surplus in that, and we feel very comfortable with the notion of recommending that we could take $25,000 from that electricity line. That brings us to about $150,000. So that leaves us for the remaining $50,000. And we've had some discussion. We're not sure exactly where that remainder could specifically come from, but I would put the following out there. We had every intention of freezing the salary around March, April, in that ballpark. That's very commonly done, so that you've got a nice smooth year and you know exactly where the money is coming from. And no other expenditures happen without superintendent and or designee approval. And our thinking is that we are committing to this. We were committing to this 200,000, or it's 100, I think it's 187 and change. We're committing to this approximate $200,000, saying we can pay this. We know that 50,000, 75,000, 25,000 is a for sure. That remaining 50,000 could come from a couple of different areas. So utility and fuel lines, depending on the winter that we have, we could try to pull something out of there. If there's more money available in some of those salary lines as we go into the year end, we could do that. We could also look at freezing part of the facilities line and take something out of that. Or we could collectively take something out of each of these three lines after we've frozen that budget. So that would make up your total of $200,000 that we could draw from to finish paying this off. So that's our suggestion. Again, we suggest the option 2, Pat and I do, but it's a school committee vote. If you feel strongly that you want to go out and do a renegotiation, again, our job is to do your bidding. So if that's the way that you'd like to go, then we would certainly support that and move forward with that.
Lynn?
Do you have something similar to this for all the other ads that you were putting in? Like the new maintenance people? Because I'm just wondering, I mean, $200,000 is a lot of money. I just wondered if...
No, those have come from other specific areas. No, this doesn't touch that at all. And you know, thank you for bringing that up because it just I sprang to another thought. One of the things that we were so diligent on is to make sure that this doesn't touch a teacher or a student. This is other stuff out there so that there was no impact felt to the children.
Mm-hmm. And then if we do this and we quietly make this all go away, because this is basically what's happening, right? So I'm just wondering, what do we do? I mean, so the loans from the bank, they were not written correctly, and we could legally go to them and say,
we're not paying,
we're done. But we're not going to do that because it's
technically you could do that, but yeah. So where are you going?
Oh, I'm saying, I would like to send them a letter and say, we could do this, but we're not going to. But we just want to let you know you did something wrong.
Well, did they or?
I don't know.
Was it what? Lynn is saying that she feels that she needs to go to, the district should go to Clinton Savings Bank and indicate to them that we don't have to pay the loans because they weren't executed. What's the word?
In compliance with Chapter 71.
Yeah. And just make them aware of it. I don't know that have you had conversation? I mean, has anyone had conversations?
Well, I have. I mean, early on, very, when I first got involved in this in September, because again, we didn't have Clinton Savings Bank documents, and so I called Clinton Savings Bank and spoke with, actually, I can't tell you the name, but I have it in my notes. And he provided me the documents, and you know, I did not specifically relay to him. Actually, I didn't have an opinion then because I hadn't seen the documents. But I certainly don't see any issue with, you know, with the advising the savings bank of what our position is and that, or you know, what our view of the legality of the loans is. That's, you know, and I think, you know, I cited to you in the opinion letter that we provided that, you know, under case law in Massachusetts, you know, entities deal with public entities, you know, at their peril. I mean, we have to comply with the law, and if they're not, and those transactions are not valid, it's no recourse. For example, Clinton Savings Bank to say, well, you've been paying on this loan for a couple of years, so you adopted it, you know, or you know, in any other way validated it. So, you know, I mean, the flip side of the coin is that, you know, the district has the equipment, at least talking about the bank loans, has been using the equipment, and so, you know, if you stop paying the loan, do you give them back the truck? I mean, that's...
Well, I don't want to not pay it. We're using it, so I don't want to not pay for it, but I want to make them aware that what they did was wrong. I mean, they should have done their due diligence as well as we should have. I mean,
but they had something from the lawyers certifying that it was all done and that wasn't, and it wasn't done right.
Yes.
So just.
And I like what you just said, because I feel like we should be responsible citizens.
yes, they don't do it again.
Well, we're just putting it on record,
They
I
were
think.
trusting that when somebody who presents himself as the district's attorney certifies something that it has gone through all the proper channels. And that's one of the issues that I have with this whole thing, that we were misrepresented, to put it mildly. But the question, and I go back and forth, you know, it's like, let's just close the chapter on this. But there's a part of it where it wasn't done properly the first time that I wonder about doing it properly, and we can still pay it off, but we've gone through a process to do it right and involve the towns as need be. So that's the do-over that I see. Doesn't mean that, you know, like when we get everything signed, sealed, and delivered, we just don't pay it off, so we're not paying any more interest. But the way that it was handled, and it's at no fault of anybody sitting at the table, it wasn't done right. And I think that's a bad reflection on us, and I'd want to make it look right. So I don't know why that wouldn't be an option. I don't know if we would incur any additional costs.
But so you're suggesting that we would go to the member towns?
We'd do it the right way. We'd have to rewrite the loans, I think.
Well, I think we'd have to approach the banks.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and re-enter, renegotiate the term of the loan. It would be obviously for a different amount because there's a payoff amount
Right.
now. So,
Right.
yeah, and during, you know, as we were in discussions or negotiations, we would, you know, I would think we would discontinue payments because we can't, you know, until we get approval from the towns, we can't make any payments. But one thing, and maybe John can jump in on this, just I offer as a perspective, is that, you know, at least one of the issues from an accounting standpoint with the Clinton Savings Bank loans is that, you know, at the time, the district had the ability to make the capital expenditure.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, I think that's what, you know, again, just in my conversations with the auditor, that's what the auditor would suggest is that, you know, while with respect to this equipment, while the loan agreement, you know, the proceeds from the loan agreement, we can't trace that. You know, the asset was on the schedule, and the auditors just assumed that the district just bought it, right? I don't know if I stated that accurately, but that's, so when you're looking at something, you know, for these amounts, and certainly in 2013 and 2015, the district could have just bought these assets outright, and you know, that's.
So what
You
would
know,
be
with
the-
respect to payout, that's essentially what you're doing. I mean, but I'm just
Right.
putting that as a
What's the
perspective.
is there a disadvantage to going through the process the way we should have done it in the first place? And then as we're doing this with the bank, that would, I can imagine that there would be a conversation about, well, this is what went wrong the first time and blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I
They're gonna
mean-
get their money either way, but it's more the process for me.
Yeah, I mean, there is the possibility that it won't be approved by the.
By the member towns. So, but let's play that out for a second. So what is the balance of the two loans, the actual loans, two loans that
The
were?
actual, so on the two mowers, it's 13.4, and on the Chevy Silverado, it's 14.5. So about $28,000 just in round numbers total.
So
For the Clinton Savings Bank.
For Clinton Savings Bank. So the other loans that were, I mean, the other leases slash loans slash leases loans, whatever the word is we're gonna use, I could get behind paying those off. But because these two loans were clearly not in compliance, I'm with Kathy because it feels like I just want people to have the opportunity to say yes or no. Now, if we go to town meeting and one or two towns says no, the reality is, if we're still within FY17, then could we not go back and I mean, you've indicated where, by then we're gonna know even more about where this budget truly is, because I'm a little bit uncomfortable about, I mean, I respect what you and Pat have done for the past 7 months. I feel good about the last 7 months, but before that, now I still have questions. So if the towns say no, then why wouldn't we be able to say, okay, Brooke and Pat, where is it? You gotta come up with $38,000, and based on what we've learned, we think it's probably in there, but at least we're giving the towns a chance to agree to being put into debt. Like, that just doesn't feel right without asking. So that would be my suggestion.
Just a procedural question from a town official perspective. Can you thumbnail what would happen if that scenario played out? What would the towns do on what timeline?
So basically, under Chapter 71, 16N and Q, what the school committee votes, and then the results of that vote are transmitted to the Board of Selectmen.
Within a certain...
7 days, I think.
Okay.
Okay? And the Board of Selectmen then have 60 days with it. If the Board of Selectmen disapprove of it, they have 60 days to convene a town meeting to vote on it. If the Board of Selectmen approve it, they can either, tell the school
Board of
committee.
Selectmen, is it authorizing debt for the town
Right,
without a vote
right,
at town meeting?
Right, right.
Just curious.
Could they be doing that through
Yeah.
inaction as opposed to affirmatively acting?
If we
Just by failing to respond to the notice from the district?
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I'm just looking at the,
We've had enough negative votes.
we provide notice within 70 days, and then the law provides a 60-day window during which the Board of Selectmen may elect to hold a town meeting and vote to disapprove it. So if there's no town meeting and vote to disapprove within the 60-day window, it's approved. Okay? And by implication, if it's approved, you can notify the school committee before the expiration of the 60 days, but the school committee can't do anything until 60 days.
You can't make payments on
Exactly.
loans during
Right.
that period.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
That was, that's 16D, and 16N says, alternatively, we, the school committee, can vote to incur the debt, and then we can conduct a district-wide election open to all registered voters.
The nuclear option.
To vote this up or down.
But can't we wait until town meeting for this?
I mean,
It says it must be submitted to a district-wide election open to all registered voters. You could wait until town meeting, but you can't make any payments in the interim.
It's all based on the timing of your
Well-
vote.
Yeah.
So I have a slightly different perspective on that. I'm kind of going from what I think in my mind is the more fiscally prudent measure. This is an action that's been done, as much as it completely fries me. It's done, and there's nothing, and like Nan said,
Did you
there's...
say
there's
fry?
Fry. There's no rolling this back. I mean, it's done, it's done. So what we're talking about is more of a procedural thing. Might make some people feel better, but I'm concerned that if we start making payments, what's that gonna do to affect our potential bond rating on something? Because, I mean, I don't know if it does or not.
But you're not entered into a,
We are now, well, now that opens up other legal things, which could be more money that we're spending.
well, we're not saying that we're not recommending paying the balance of the loan. I don't think that's what Kathy's saying, and I'm certainly not saying
No,
it.
I don't, if it
But we'd be in default of the loan by the time it went to town meeting as well.
see, that's the part I didn't
Right.
know.
And so that's where I'm going. So if we're defaulting on a loan, what does that do to our bond rating? That's very important, obviously, when we're talking about various aspects of the high school, et cetera, and that could impact us.
But are we
for-
defaulting
Well,
on a loan if the loan
But
is?
here's the thing, our view would be, we're not defaulting if
Right.
it wasn't valid, but Clinton Savings Bank may very well say, well, wait a minute, we're not just gonna take that line down. I mean, I have no idea, this
You know
is-
what?
We have documents, and so then maybe we're in a legal dispute, and certainly
Right.
our position is that this was not a valid loan. We have case law behind us. I mean, I'm very confident of that, but it's a transaction cost of defending it and.
So it sounds like
And
this
the manpower
conversation.
involved with getting all of this
Yeah,
done.
but we haven't even talked
organized,
to
and
Clinton
everything
Savings
else.
Bank. I mean, no one from the district has had a conversation with them about
So we need to find out the
situation.
proceeds issue, right?
What?
I mean, we need to trace the proceeds and find out how that's worked.
That's why,
To get,
yeah.
but that's something, I think that's totally different. I mean, if we pay that off and we find out there are others, right? I mean, but I mean, that's my concern. If we hold this down the line, yeah, there's gonna be some people that are gonna be happy. But, what happens if people reject everything and now we're back to exactly where we were, except do we pay it off or not? Now, in my mind, it is a horrible thing that was done, but there are potentially, is it small business or is it just the banks? Who's gonna be affected if we don't pay?
The bank.
Are there, it's just strictly like if it's the HP and stuff like that?
No, I'm just talking about the
Strictly the
two
bank. He's
loans.
talking about the two bank
two
loans,
Clinton
right.
Savings, unfortunately, and Clinton Savings Bank is they're a good community partner, and I don't wanna
And they may
harm
no longer
them.
be a good community partner, and what's the cost of that? You
Well,
know,
we
I mean,
don't
so-
know, we're
Well,
assuming.
I'm speculating a lot, just like
Right.
everybody else is speculating.
Not
at the
really,
table.
we're talking about options, but I don't think anyone's talking about defaulting on a loan or not eventually paying off a loan.
If you're not paying the
Go
loan
ahead.
and it's 60 days, you're going into the default process.
You mentioned, why doesn't somebody from a central office have a conversation
Right.
with somebody at Clinton Savings Bank and see how they see it playing out?
Mm-hmm,
And then we make a decision at that point when we hear from them.
sure.
Because everybody's trying to do the right thing. We're going to pay the money one way or another, but how do we do that? Do we do it in one fell swoop, or do we go through the process?
I just want people to be, somehow the rights of residents were not, how do I say this, Nan? Help me say this.
Somehow, the loans were not entered into with proper input from the member towns.
Okay, that's what she said.
Yes.
And I think we need to give people the right to decide if they want to enter into debt. And that's my only point. And yes, it's figurative, but let's let Nicole speak.
Let's let the district get on with the business of being a school district. Let's not have them call the banks and figure out what probabilities are or what's gonna happen next. Let's move on.
Well, we are gonna move on, Nicole. This is a conversation. I don't think this is a big deal, and we need the paperwork that we don't have in the district anyway. But you're right, we're gonna move on. This is, do we wanna do this out of respect?
Do we want to move on tonight, or do we want to move on 2 weeks from now? We were elected to represent our constituents, and we are representing them right now. We are showing them respect right now.
Yeah.
You're saying that they need to be more respected?
No, I'm saying if someone took out a credit card in your name and ran up a balance on it, and you didn't know about it until you started to open up statements, and all of a sudden you have to pay for this. I'm saying, should you, when it's identified, should you have the right, and maybe you
But
got
if
stuff
I-
delivered to your
If I have
house.
someone representing me, opening my credit cards, that I elected to represent me and decide what should happen there, I would hope that that representative was taking my best interest in heart, and right now our best interest is wiping the slate clean and letting our schools function.
Well, the schools are functioning,
letting our-
$38,000 isn't gonna harm the district, but I hear what you're
No, but
saying.
someone's going to spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes trying to figure out what the implications are, what they might be if we default on a loan. They're gonna come present to us, we're gonna sit here for an hour listening to it. It's just more time. It's more time devoted to something that we have a solution in front of us that we could make happen.
How do you folks feel?
I'm in alignment with Nicole. I think we can figure out some way or another to find sufficient money to extinguish all the leases and loans. Maybe a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's possible. And then we're done. And it's through our own action. We don't have to interact any further with the outside world, and we can make it happen. And we have learned a lesson about how these should be done, and I don't think we'll be in such an occasion in the future.
Yeah.
I want to pull the Clinton Savings Bank out, pay the other ones off, and then, because we still have to research Clinton Savings Bank, we don't know where that money went. There's no record of where it went. And it's not good.
Yeah.
And I'd like to just, we don't know necessarily that these loans were taking out in our best intentions, because in my mind, they weren't. Because I didn't have any representation of that. I was assessed as a tax-paying member, right? So my assessments were not because of the undisclosed interest that had to be paid. So there was nothing as far as me having an option to decide what was better for me or not.
Right.
So I have to kind of disagree with that. I agree with Nicole in the other parts, that I think this is one of these things where we're coming down to the, you know, Brian's not here anymore, but we're coming down to that $10,000 that we're arguing over, and how much is the potential of that actually, what is the true cost of not paying those loans off?
So-
And that's all I'm trying to.
So I want to make sure, I think what Kathy and now Lynn and I'm saying are, it's not don't pay the loans off, it's give the towns the opportunity to decide if they want to go into debt. I disagree that it's going to take hours and hours and hours. I do not agree with that. I'm sorry, I just don't. You know what, Nicole? It is 9:20 and we've been here a long time, and this was probably the most critical thing we had to get through this year, so I get it. We're spending time on it. But you know what? We need to deliberate on stuff. I don't have a problem with talking about it and understanding where people are coming. My only point was, are we giving, the district at some point took away the residents' opportunity to decide whether or not they wanted to get into debt. That got taken away from them. And we're saying, we're gonna pay it, and we can pay that off and be done with it. But we're kind of, it's almost like we're just doing the same thing, we're perpetuating it. I could get behind paying the $200,000 if we have it, and God hope we have it, that we don't get to the end of this year and say, well, we really didn't have what we thought we had, because that could be crazy. I could do that. I'm talking about the respectful right of the residents. That's it. And you guys decide what you want to do. I mean.
Can I ask John a question?
Yeah.
John, if we ceased, in your opinion, if we ceased payments, which we would have to do if we were going to bring this to the member towns, does that in any way, shape, or form run the risk of affecting our bond rating in any scenario that you can think of?
Well, I think, you know, we talked about whether it's default to the bank, it would be default if you do not make the payments and leave them monthly. if you stop making monthly payments after a period of time, you'll be in default. And
That's what I'm worried
there's a
about.
ramification to that.
So,
And, you know, as much as I understand what you're saying, is it's kind of putting the towns in a tough position, because if you take the vote now, I mean, do you force them to go to a special town meeting and
No.
pay for all the costs? Well, you're kind of putting them in a tough position.
well, we don't have to take the vote now, but I
In
hear
terms
you.
of how they process that. And it just seems like, you know, for the money that, you know, you're talking about $28,000. You know, talking about several $100,000. And Brooke, you and I talked that the payoff number that you have, I don't think takes into consideration that within your budget, for all of the loans that are paid off monthly, you have some of that money in your budget. So when where's the money gonna come from to pay it?
That's exactly
Some of
right.
it's already in the budget. And that may adjust how much you've gotta come up with in surplus funds.
All right, I'm gonna go back to Kathy.
Can I just, really, because if we do take that vote, then we do that, we take the vote, the towns then say,
We get
somebody
it.
comes back and says, no.
I get it. I want
We're then going to tell
I
the
want
town.
Kathy to talk. We've already heard,
We're
we
then
know where
going to
you're
tell the
at. I'm
town,
trying to work
regardless
this
of
for
what we
you.
said, we're still paying the debt.
Kathy, where are you at?
I think, well, I'm surprised at myself saying this, but I think that I was gonna say what I think Neil was trying to say, and that is that, so we take it out to the town, they vote no, we still have to pay it anyway.
Right, we're gonna pay it.
Right, and I think that the middle ground might be what Lynn is proposing, because I agree, Clinton Savings,
How's what Lynn,
well, Lynn,
how did it differ? I'm confused.
What Lynn, I think, was proposing is that you pull out the Clinton Savings Bank loan and
I think that's what, yeah, I think we're on the same page.
pay off the other one.
Right.
And then go, because it is a local bank, I think it's important for them to understand that they were essentially duped. And that,
I think we're on the same page.
yeah, that you can work with somebody that's local to understand your situation.
But I think what
or-
Neil's saying is if we do that and we go into default, if we, all right, somebody make a motion.
If we don't move, you have to make your payments until you get your new loan.
Yeah.
You can't put it in and you won't miss
I would think.
Lorraine, you have to make your payments until you get the new loan. Why would
Right.
you default?
But
No, I
Leanne
agree
was advising
with you.
something different, though, with that, I think, if I
Only
understood you
people-
correctly.
With the
If we're going to the town meeting, let's say we section off Clinton Savings.
Well, right, I mean, I think the way that I would see it happening, if that's what you're gonna do, is that, because before you go to town meeting, the school committee has to take a vote.
Right.
And before the school committee takes a vote, somebody needs to talk to Clinton Savings Bank and give you something to vote on, which
Right.
is, you know, which is a renegotiation of the loan, or, you know, renegotiation of the outstanding amount. And so there needs to be a little bit of legwork done from, you know, both the legal perspective. Okay, let's sit down, what do we have here, renegotiate this loan, comes before the school committee, 7 days it goes to the Board of Selectmen, and then they have 7 days to 60 days to disapprove it with a town meeting vote. And that would be the process. So it's gonna take a couple months. In the meantime, once you take the vote, you know, you're not paying because you've made the decision that you're gonna go this other route, and
That's the part, Kathy, where
See,
you
I
go
don't
into.
you know what, hold on, but before you take the vote, presumably there's gonna be a deal with Clinton Savings Bank, okay? Somebody has to approach that bank and say, this is what we're gonna do. And they're either gonna say up or down, okay? And if it's, you know, whatever the terms are, they're negotiated, that's what you take the vote on. There's nothing really to vote on. You're gonna know if the bank is willing to negotiate or renegotiate or not, and that's.
But we're not renegotiating our loan, we're gonna pay it off. I mean,
Well, you are gonna be
not-
renegotiating.
We're basically saying we have to start today. You know, we basically, here's the payoff amount, and, you know, it's, so it may not be, it's not an extensive, you know, renegotiation, but they have to be brought in, and so that's, you know, there's just a few steps there.
So I guess I go back to what I said
Also, we're not gonna spend
a while back, is that then I would want to know something from Clinton Savings Bank, if we spelled this
Right.
scenario out for them. So if that were the case, I wouldn't be able to make a decision until I heard from them.
Right, and I think that's kind
So-
of what we talked about, right? We need to talk to Clinton Savings Bank, and they need to be made aware at least of the situation.
So maybe that's the vote we take tonight, because I'm not ready to decide.
I don't think we have to take the vote, I
Okay,
think we
I
just
would
direct
authorize-
Brooke to
Yeah,
please
and then
gather
come back
up
with
all the
information,
information
yeah.
and make them aware of it.
Yeah.
Because you're still making your monthly payments, right?
What's the end game, though? Fine, it goes to a vote, you go to Clinton Savings, it goes to a vote. One town votes that down. Then you're gonna have to turn to that town and say, I'm sorry, we're still honoring.
I don't think
We're going to pay it,
I don't
and
think
that's gonna
anyone
tick
at this
off those
table
people.
has said, I will not vote to pay the Clinton Savings Bank loan as it is. So,
I'm talking about the towns. If we're going to a town meeting, right, we're taking this Clinton Savings to a town meeting, is this what we're talking about,
But
with this
that's
whole process?
but that's assuming that this committee has decided not to pay the loan. And what I'm saying is, I don't think this committee is deciding not to pay the loan. Right?
Right.
Right.
I'm confused then.
Right, so listen, sir.
I was.
I think, and I think you and I are in sync, and I think the three of us are somehow connected, and you guys are like, you're crazy, you people are crazy. But we're really not.
Oh.
So, we don't have the paperwork, we don't know where the proceeds of, we need that documentation. We haven't, as good neighbors, indicated to a bank with whom we've entered into an agreement in the past that things may not be the way they should have been. And I think if we want to have a relationship with that good neighbor going forward, we need to let them know what's been happening. So Brooke and Pat, I would assume you, will go have that conversation. Bring the information back. Now it satisfies us. We know where things are. We know where all the money went, where it is, and how it was working. Then you want to take a vote and say, we can pay for it, we can't pay for it. I don't care. I just don't think we need to take a look at the documentation before we move forward.
So you're looking for option 2 with the carve-out of Clinton Savings?
I'm looking at not voting on any option tonight. But
Until
you guys,
we do
until
hear
we
about
get the
this,
documentation.
yes.
Right.
That would be my preference.
Is there a time frame from when you are aware of the situation to when you fix it?
That's not in the statute, no.
Now, and you guys decide, if somebody wants to do something different and you want to take a vote, somebody make a motion, get it on the table, and let's move on.
I mean, I think also just, we do have documents from Clinton Savings Bank. The missing piece is, we have a document from the bank that indicates that the proceeds of the loan went into a district account, but we don't have none of the financial statements in the district show that going into the account. But that's, so there's, Clinton Savings Bank has provided us, and those are documents, provided by the savings. So we do, it's not like we have no documents, we do have documents from the bank. So the clarification question is where did those loan proceeds go?
I'll start with a half measure. I move that we pay off all of the leases or so-called leases this fiscal year.
I will second.
I have a question. All of the leases are, there's
The lease is mentioned in Schedule A.
So are you excluding anything?
I'm ignoring the Clinton Savings Bank.
So excluding Clinton Savings Bank loans. Okay.
So said another way, Mark, what the motion is, and it might be a good idea just to identify them, to
Right, sure.
pay off the Wells Fargo, Deer Credit, HP Financial Services,
Correct.
and that's it, right? Because Leasing
Right.
Innovations is done, yeah.
So restated, I move that we pay off the leases for Wells Fargo, Deer Credit, and HP Financial Services in this fiscal year.
I restate my second.
Okay. Any questions? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, we moved the ball forward. Superintendent Clunchy's gonna get some documentation. Not gonna harm us to look at the documentation, and then we'll talk about the Clinton Savings Bank loans. Alita, can you make sure that's on the next agenda? Unless somebody wants to make another motion.
I'm good with that. I'm good with that, I'm just not good with going to towns and putting the burden on them and then option 3, basically, or whatever it is. I don't want.
Putting the burden on them.
For these loans and leases, and somebody I've already covered it, so I don't need to go into that, but I don't want to have the situation where we put ourselves into a tough spot, we put the towns into a tough spot, somebody rejects this loan for whatever purpose,
And you
so
pay
then
it.
we still have to come back and say, yeah, but we're gonna pay it anyways. Because that, as a taxpayer, if I rejected that loan and I
Right.
took that and then you did that,
That's a good point.
I would be really, really upset with
But
you.
wouldn't,
Yeah.
wouldn't you just go to town hall anyways, and would they say that this is just a, paperwork thing we've gotta do, and this is the loan, and it's not gonna.
Yeah, probably,
you're not
that's what I'm
incurring
saying, so
annual loan.
exactly, and every day that we don't pay this off, we're paying more interest, so.
But if we do it right, it'll just fall right into town meeting.
All right. Are we done with this?
We voted.
Got some frustrated people. We'll get it done. Just, we all need time to let this soak in. I hear where you're at. I feel like I feel like somehow people's right to actively enter into debt knowingly.
Absolutely.
That's my problem. And so maybe I just need to let it sit for a while and come back to it. All right, moving on. Subcommittee reports. Finance. Gosh, do you have anything? Can you?
We've been working on a ton. Brooke and Pat have been bringing forward some good stuff. Well, you saw the report today that we got, which was the quarterly. That was something we've been running through finance, and we took a look at the last incarnation, and you guys tweaked it with some suggestions, which was great. Mark created a fantastic document, which I'm hoping becomes a model and leads to a ton of transparency going into the general ledger and looking at particular line items and a reconciliation that is really what John had got to, so we can take a look at where the any overage or underage for each line, and then once you start building a year over year, you can start identifying, are you over budgeting or under budgeting continuously for this particular area, and it really helps clean up the budget that way.
Good.
So those are among, and we had OPEB, since we've been, the last meeting we talked about OPEB and.
So OPEB and E&D needs to kind of come up quick, because we're gonna need your recommendation as we go into this budget cycle.
I think Brooke had some E&D stuff that she had mentioned that I think the next meeting that you guys wanted to bring forward, so I think that's gonna end up on the agenda.
But I want you guys to.
Right, we're gonna have this conversation.
Okay.
She had some thoughts, she's meeting with
I got it.
Lamar's representative, et cetera.
And then, okay, thanks. Personnel, we didn't have a
Nothing
meeting.
to report. Next meeting is January 23rd, which is next month.
Nicole, do you want to do policy?
Yeah, the policy committee is currently trying to coordinate our schedule with Dorothy so we can sit through the first batch of policies that they have gone through.
And CPAC?
CPAC has their next meeting, I believe, Wednesday, February 8th. It's for parents of high school students, entitled Social Security Benefits and Employment for Students in Transition from School to Adult Life.
Thanks. And tech committee, anything? Neil?
No, we did not meet.
Emergency response, she's not here. Audit advisory. Where is that?
The Audit Advisory Committee is meeting tomorrow. We have a draft RFP. We've done some research with other regional school districts to see what other auditors are engaged, to get a sense of how big the field is. I have copies of the draft RFP, which I could hand out to people, and that way people can read in preparation for the next meeting to perhaps bless the RFP. or not, if you so
Why
wish.
why don't you get it to Alita, she can stick it in the packet for us.
All right. And I expect tomorrow that we will finish the RFP and basically have a recommendation for the school committee to go forward with that.
Oh, that's great. That's progress. Thank you. And why don't you, please, give us some good news. Give us some, give us some district stuff.
Some district stuff. Okay, I'm excited to do that. So first of all, we've been working, as I said earlier, Pat, we're calling it a corrective action plan based on the findings of the forensic audit and MASBO, and we have, as I said, we started some earlier discussion to end that. So I feel really good about where we're heading with that. Center School, we had a wonderful celebration, was it last week? And our Commissioner of Education came out, Representative Kate Hogan was there, I know Brian Burke was there. We had a really, like a star-studded audience for the Commissioner. So proud, and it was a moment in time to really reflect on Center School and the good things that are happening there. It's being recognized as a commendation school. Just to give you a flavor of statistics, there are over 1,900 schools in the state, and only 51 were identified as a commendation, and Center's one of them. So just thrilled. The commissioner was so impressed with what he saw. It was and I thought that we as a community, I thought, did very well. I think we represented the community very well. Ross and the team did fantastic. Nick, oh my gosh, he was still scrubbing the floor as we were walking in because it was like wet out that morning. He didn't want any footprints, and they were running fans behind him. Oh my gosh, it was really something to watch. But it was fabulous. Organization chart, I just want to talk about that because I know that you'd asked me early on, what's the new organization chart look like? And we drafted one this summer, and now that we've got some of these other positions in play, I just kind of tacked them in there. But the truth is, it's just a flat organization because there's not a lot of hierarchy in our school district. It's me and then everybody else. Like there's not an assistant super, there's not extra directors or all that kind of thing. So I'm going to bring that forward at some point in time in the next meeting. Like I keep waiting for a breather, and there's just not a breather to bring in this kind of thing, like some of the normal stuff that we would.
Oh, bring in the normal stuff.
Okay, so I'll bring forward the organizational chart just so you can take a look at it. Emerson Youth Risk Survey, Donna Lindstrom is again also waiting to come to meet with you to present. The survey results are for the Emerson, out for the Emerson Risk Survey, Youth Risk Survey, and there's some interesting information in there that we need to pay attention to. And so I really think it's critical that she comes in as soon as we have a free half hour for her.
So she's on the next agenda.
Well, we put a placeholder there for her. I don't know whether we'll get to her or not. But
she won't be available?
No, it's not that. We'll have to take a look at our own agenda now because we're going to do this corrective action plan in there, and that's going to take some time. So it's going to depend on how long you want for that meeting. The Assabet Valley Collaborative, I represent the school district on the Assabet Collaborative Executive Board, and so they've got some things happening with them that I want to bring forward to you at the next meeting. They are looking at doing a purchase of the space that they're in, and we can talk about what that looks like at the next meeting. It's really, for you, honestly, it's just more informational. There's not a vote, there's nothing like that, because it's totally separate from you, but it's about me informing you. Okay, so I'll do that. Worcester County Superintendent Roundtable, we had our scholar luncheon, was last week, and Jordan Bricknell from the high school, what a wonderful representative she was. Of course I've just snapped all kinds of pictures and tweeted it out and such. So I would really like to bring her in and recognize her as our annual scholar with the Superintendent's Roundtable. I thought, as I said to Chairman Moscow, even if we just give her a nice bouquet of flowers, I think I'll take one of the pictures and blow it up, and where she's getting the award. It was just a really, really special afternoon. So hats off to Jordan. Tri-Town meeting, we want to thank our 3 communities for coming out. They just are so supportive of us, so very much appreciate that. The budget workshop you've already alluded to on the 28th. I've spoken again about ongoing meeting schedules with our district administrators, and my last point is to thank again our DPW staff and our district staff. Because again this morning, I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning and our first outreach to our DPWs this morning was about 4:15, and then, as I watched the other DPWs in the area for the storm watch and such, to see, do we do a delayed start, I knew we weren't gonna have to cancel, but of course, that's always something you keep in the back of your mind. And so we did our first outreach around 4:45 this morning. I was watching the other communities and the other DPWs, because all the superintendents share out our DPW information to see where we're at, and ours said that they felt it was fine, that we didn't need a delayed start. We did another outreach about 5:25, and they all said, nope, we're good to go. And so hats off to all of those people for, first of all, those types of mornings, like this morning, staying in contact with us, feeding us good information. I knew where the roads were slick, where it was, I had really detailed information this morning coming into me. So I feel like we've got a nice synergy going with our DPW, so I'm very, very grateful. And so I was gonna send a note out to our town administrators to say thanks again. If you can pass along our appreciation to your DPW leads. The fact that they're so in sync with us, just so appreciative. And that's it for me.
That's quick.
Fast
That
as
was
I can go.
good, and we want more of that. Okay, consent agenda, unless anybody has a question, issue. We've already, I think Brooke just outlined the next agenda items, and I think we are done. Would someone like to make a motion to, Kathy? Thank you. Second, Mark, all those in favor? Aye. Unanimous, aye, ayes. Thank you.
I'm gonna do the awards next to you.